fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's might have finally found the missing link in their forward line. No one would have had 14 goals from Petty, JVR and Melksham on their bingo cards at the start of the 2023 season. Joining me tonight to dissect another fantastic win at the MCG is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Bin Man. Good evening to all our Demonland listeners. But before we start on the footy tonight, last week we celebrated our 200th podcast, and we thanked all those people who contributed to its success. However, we forgot to acknowledge the one person, and that is the person who makes all of this possible. The person who has headlined in all the 200 shows, the person who has provided the technical means by which this program goes to air each week, the person who does all the preparation for the show, and then has to control all of us mad Demon supporters who show up each episode. The reason we're here tonight and every other night is Andy. So a big thank you from all of us and everything that you've done to make this show a success.
Well, thank you, George. You're going to make me cry. No, I really appreciate that. I actually thought you were going to thank the players, who without the players, there is nothing to talk about. But thank you, George. And also thank you to Bin Man, who's also joining us tonight. Are you possibly doing a couple of laps of honour around the studio?
Around the studio. Good evening, Annie. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And just really love to echo those comments from George. It's amazing how much work Andy does to get this happening every week. And it's unbelievably impressive on top of all the rest of the Demonland work that he does. So, yeah, kudos to you. It was, what a result, huh? It's a fantastic game of footy. It's interesting there's a question about this, and so we'll get to it, I guess. But I didn't think it was the greatest game of footy in some respects. It was a great result, and that score was amazing. But we'll get to that. But it was a nerve-wracking sort of first half. But I always felt that we were in control, and a really fascinating game on a lot of levels, I thought. And kudos to Richmond, who really brought it. I mean, I thought they played fantastic, and that's the best I've seen Dusty play for a long time. He ran out of gas a bit in the last quarter, but he was awesome. Shea Bolton is just a star. I just love the way he plays footy. I thought there was... I thought Soldo did fantastic in the first half too, so it was fascinating. We'll talk about Max, obviously, a bit later. There's questions about Max. I thought his comment at the game that he got a rocket from Goody at halftime was fascinating, and there's a lot about Maxi that he brought that up, I thought, and he deflects praise really every week, really. So much to love. 130 points at the G. I'll make one comment though about the crowd. I don't know, maybe I missed it. Did you boys see any criticism of Richmond's membership? I thought they've got like 452,000 paid up members. Well, how come in a game against the top four traditional Victorian rival, when they're playing for their spot in the 8 on a beautiful Sunday afternoon in a decent time slot, they could only get 52,000 rocked up? If it was the equivalent D's game, it'd be all these jokes about the snow and, good Lord.
Did no one blame the lack of Melbourne supporters for any comments about the crowd this week?
Well, I couldn't. I mean, I thought that was another fantastic, in all seriousness. I've been talking about this the last couple of weeks. I have no question it had an impact in our close wins. Not so sore about this one because it wasn't close in the end. But, I was sitting at the top of the Ponsford, but quite far around near the members. And the members was packed. There was a good Melbourne fan. It felt like a Melbourne home game. It really did. The Melbourne fans were louder. I mean, I was on I'm more on that side, but I thought it was a fantastic turn up by D's fans. And I reckon Richmond should be thanking us for getting to 52,000 and filling their coffers.
I think a lot of the criticism from people who aren't actually at the game, they watch on TV, and they a lot of them, I think I've mentioned on the podcast, because when you watch any Melbourne game, on the TV, the AFL members and that side of the ground where the cameras are pointing to looks quite sparsely populated. But then the side that we're all on, or George, you do sit in the in that other side, but you must be looking back at us, and that stand's always pretty full for Melbourne games, and I'm sure it was the same this week.
Yeah, I was in the MCC this week, and it was absolutely chockers everywhere. So, with Melbourne supporters.
The MCC, George.
Ooh, George.
Yeah, I go everywhere.
Right.
I'm on the outer and the inner.
A man about town in swanning around in the MCC. So a club that won't have me, I won't have them. So.
Well, Dutch Demons asked on the podcast thread, he asked, Andy, we won by 5 goals. Are you happy now? And look, I think some people were misreading my comments from a few weeks ago after the Saints game, where I was disappointed that we didn't win by more, and that was primarily predicated on the fact that we had 3 men down early in the first, yet we weren't able to put them to the sword. And I was disappointed on that day, but certainly not unhappy. And at the end of the day, I really don't care how much we win games by. I'll happily take a win, be it 1 point, 5 goals, 90 points. Obviously prefer the 90 points. I was wrapped with this win. I was nervous as hell for 3 quarters. I got 2 high heart alerts on my watch. Long-time listeners of the podcast would have heard a few years ago I got that. I got it again, so I might have to see a doctor for that one. But I think I got those high heart rate alerts because I was sitting amongst some numpty opposition fans who I think have just no ideas on the actual rules of the game. It was absolutely remarkable. Some of those Richmond supporters.
I read a bit about that on Demonland, some criticism of the Richmond fans, but where I was sitting, I was surrounded by Richmond fans, and including a friend of mine who's a big Tigers fan, and 2 of his daughters, and they were great. The fans are out. The Richmond fans were fine around me. So, the free kick thing was interesting, and I guess we'll get to that because I know there's a question.
There is. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
There must have been a day release program going on somewhere near me because I didn't feel safe.
Yeah, I actually thought the umpiring was okay, but as I said, we'll get to it.
All right.
On the heart meter, if there was a meter to measure frustration levels, mine would have exploded by half time because I was unusually nervous and stressed and during the game, and there were so many errors in that first half, like just clangers, some shockers. But that's you make a cake with the way we play, you're gonna break some eggs. So
we've got questions on that too, so we'll get into that. Those heart rate alerts that I got, so I haven't got it in a while, and we've had 2 very, very close games of late, and not a ping from my watch. So I don't know what was going on this week, and that wasn't even in the last quarter. That was sort of midway through the game. Each week I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review, a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback. We do read them out on the show. The 5 stars really does help boost the podcast and gets more people listening through the algorithms at Apple Podcasts. So I'm in China writes, Demon Loading. This is a podcast for the Demon true believers when 2 hours plus Demon talk is barely enough. Great review all the way from China. Maybe there's a massive market that we can get into, guys, in China. Tom in Thornbury writes, among my people, I started listening to the pod partway through this season after looking for something with more in-depth analysis. I enjoyed it straight away and very quickly started looking forward to it as part of every week. I love the scale of different outlooks of the team with Andy at half empty and Bim Man half full. I reckon he's full. And George somewhere in between. So I generally align with one of you on any given week. When Binman referred to Tex Walker as Tex Perkins in this week's pod, I knew I was truly among my people, and it was time for the requested 5-star review. Thanks for all your work and passion. Can't wait for finals to see what we can do. Go D's. Well, thanks, Tom. Welcome aboard. Appreciate the review. J. Brad writes, best in the business, the analysis of our games is amazing and puts everything back into perspective after listening to the so-called experts in the media. You boys do an amazing job. Keep up the good work and go D's. Thanks, J. Brad. Jeebs writes, great listening as a lifelong D supporter who now lives in Queensland. I really enjoyed this podcast. Lots of other podcasts annoy me because the hosts are wannabe footy bogans who love the sound of their own voices and throw the F word around too liberally in an attempt to be relevant and mask the fact that they don't know what they're talking about. They grate on my nerves after 10 minutes, but the Demonland podcast soothes my nerves with all of the sensible discussions, opinions and predictions. Man's my favourite. It's so nice to hear some optimism about the team I love after a lifetime of on-field woes and hack commentators. Thanks. Well, thanks, Jeebs. Great review. Even if Bean Man is your favourite, George, we're not getting any love here. Keep the feedback coming. Give us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts, and please don't forget to click that write a review link and write a review for us as well as the 5 stars, and we'll read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter or Threads and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read your real first name, your real last name to identify you. We have a few reviews and comments from our podcast post on Facebook from last week, and I always ask people to comment, so I've got to give our listeners the shout-outs when they do comment. Alistair writes, thanks for the weekly therapy. It's good to know others are going through the same mental anguish and excitement and everything in between. Great show, go D's. Thanks, Alistair. Carol writes, great stuff. Thanks, Carol. Short and to the point, but all that we appreciate it. Stephen M. writes in response to our 200th episode last week. Congratulations. Keep up the great work. I can only imagine how much time you put into this great podcast. It is appreciated. Thank you, Stephen. David W. writes, it's a must listen for a demon tragic in footy staff, Capricorn Coast, Queensland. Keep up the great work. Thanks, David. Ben E. writes, bravo, Andy and the team on the milestone. May your dissections continue to be mainly victorious ones. Thanks, Ben. Judy writes, thank you for all the super efforts. I always enjoyed the considered reports of each game. I think she's referring to your reports, George, your match reports. Thanks, Judy. And finally, Peter H. writes, congratulations, boys, on another great podcast. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Well done. Thank you, Peter. In regards to our 200th episode last week on Demonland, 3183D, a poster on Demonland, said, a huge congratulations to Demonland on your 200th podcast last week. Like a great footballer, the Demonland podcast has got better and better with time. The synergy between Andy, George and Binners is like a third quarter grand final Demons midfield, well-oiled, oozing class and kicking goals. Really appreciate your efforts and insight on what is clearly a labour of love, with you all giving up your time and resources to provide us with the best D's podcast around. Well, thank you, 3183D. Really nice of you to say. Hopefully we can continue to go bang, 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 bang in the third quarter. If you want to chat with other Demons fans, if you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Demons fans from across Australia, around the world. It's completely free. In addition to posting questions and comments for the podcast, there's also lots of topics you can talk about with many Demon fans. So join in the conversation. If you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 03 9016 3666, 03 9016 3666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, I'll bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. And during the week, you can call that number, leave a message. We'll play it on the show. Got a couple tonight. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room by heading over to demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be more attentive to the comments and questions there. We are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Well, let's get straight into the match wrap-up. For 3 quarters, the Tigers absolutely challenged the D's, and on 2 occasions we found ourselves down by 20 points, and at times it looked like the Tigers would steamroll us, but to the D's credit, each time we dug deep to claw our way back into the match, and by 3-quarter time we held a narrow lead. At the start of the last quarter, the Demons were pressing but couldn't score a goal from their 5 forward 50 entries, when McIntosh scored at the 7.5-minute mark, and then Noah Bolter 2.5 minutes later to wrestle the lead back. I must admit, I thought that we were done for, but this invigorated Demons team won't go down without a fight. And not only did we pick ourselves off the deck, we landed 6 knockout blows to silence the Tiger Army. The fight back was led by our courageous captain, Max Gawn, who was simply superb in the second half of this match. His match stats as our lone ruck were once again stellar. 28 possessions with an incredible 22 contested, 40 hit-outs, 12 to advantage, 11 clearances, 7 in the last quarter alone, which was more than the Tigers in total could produce. 10 score involvements, 8 inside 50s, 5 marks and 541 metres gained. Just incredible. Jack Viney's past month and change has been outstanding as he bullocked his way from contest to contest, willing the team over the line. 32 possessions, 10 contested, 9 tackles, 9 inside 50s, 5 score involvements and 560 metres gained. His partner in crime, Christian Petrarca, racked up 29 posies, 14 contested, 13 score involvement, 8 inside 50s, 5 tackles, 547 metres gained and 1 goal 3. His accuracies from snaps being my only criticism, and I just imagine how much more damaging he would be nailing those opportunities. I thought that at times we struggled in defence under a constant barrage of some very quick entries, which unfortunately is a price we may have to pay for a more attacking game plan, and we're going to talk more in depth about that later. Jake Lever played a great intercept game with 9 intercept possessions, 3 intercept marks, as well as 7 spoils. Trent Rivers continued his stellar season off half-back, and his drives out of the backline are becoming a hallmark of his game. He was really damaging with 22 touches, and his booming kicks helped rack up 427 metres gained for the match. But the Cinderella story is our forward line, in particular the move of Harrison Petty from the back line, which was teased earlier in the season before injury put that on hold. 6 goals from 11 disposals and 10 marks, 7 of those in the forward 50 and 4 of them contested marks. The last time a Demons player kicked 6 goals was in the 2020 Grand Final, I believe. Young forward Jacob Van Rooyen once again made the Tigers his bunny, kicking 4 goals from 4 marks. Jake Milksham continued his outstanding month of footy with 4 goals of his own, bending it like Beckham from the boundary. 14 goals from our key and medium forwards is every Demon fan's fever dream. It was a fantastic win with a month to go and a favourable draw. We will most likely sew up the double chance, and no, my MSC SS prevents me from locking it in. We're also a very sneaky chance of pinching second spot, but we're going to have to wait on other results to determine that. George, anything else you want to report from the match?
No, I want to know how we're going to get out of the top 4 according to your theories.
You have a loss against North Melbourne, you lose to Carlton, all of a sudden you're back to the pack. You never know. Stranger things have
Andy,
happened.
How are we going to help you?
I'll never be helped. Premiership or bust.
No, it was a great game. I was a little disappointed in Richmond in a way. I thought they were a much more challenging side, but it was interesting listening to Goody's comments after the game. While it's great to kick 130 points, it's only because, to a certain extent, the opposition allow you to play that way. I think Richmond are on the downward slide in a big way, more than what they probably realise at this stage. Some of their premiership players aren't what they used to be, and I suspect they're only going to get worse with age. We've been waiting for the cliff with Geelong, but I think Richmond have got exactly the same problem. They've got some brilliant players, as Binman mentioned. Bolton and Soldo were fantastic for a while, but they're rapidly becoming only a couple of the serious contributors to the side. It was Dusty's best game for a long time, but he has to spend a lot of time down forward now because he simply can't run the game out. But we got over him in the end. We had far much more in the tank than what they did, and 6 goals from that in that last half of the last quarter was just superb to watch from a Melbourne supporter's point of view.
I reckon you're being a bit harsh on the Tigers, George, because I thought, I don't disagree that they're probably going, they're going towards the bottom, not towards the top. But I thought their effort was fantastic, actually. Again, it was one of those games where we jumped out and our contested possession numbers, we were up 8 or 9 within about 5 or 6 minutes on contested possession numbers. The margin in the end was only 6 contested possessions by the end of the match. That shows, unlike other teams when you crack them, shows pretty good grit for the Tigers to stick with that game. And, I just felt like they ran out of gas in that last leg. It was a real win for our fitness. For me, and I'll expand on this a little bit later with one of the questions, but for me, there was a real hint of arrogance with the way we went about playing that game. And it was almost as if Goody said, look, one thing I didn't sort of note last week that I heard during the week is how efficient Richmond have been scoring in the last few weeks and under the new coach, Mini, as they like to call him. But and that's how it played out. But it was almost as if Goody said, you want to be high scoring, you want to have an open game. We can do that too, and let's just go head to head. And for me, that it just felt like there was a real sense of arrogance, and no better example of it was, I mean, you got to love Petty. He's such a classic old school mid-70s footballer, but not that they would have done this, but his hand up, his cup to his ear after he slotted the goal was classic, I thought. And so, yeah, I thought their effort was really good. I thought Soldo played really well. As I said, there was that real touch of aggression. Really exciting, footy. It was from a neutral's perspective, it would have been a great game to watch. I was a little bit frustrated with it at the game. Of course, by the end of the game, I was less frustrated. But from a neutral's perspective, that up and down, back and forth sort of game is a great, great thing to watch. So, full of highlights. They actually fluffed their lines a little bit where they could have put us under more pressure, but, so did we, I thought. So, a lot to be positive about. The negative is this week I have decided to listen to every bit of media I can. And, I've put my grumpy old man hat on because the media narrative still gets it wrong. So all of a sudden Goody's supposedly a genius coach for dropping Grundy. And, again, it just, it's my biggest bugbear is the clear evidence is that, we're getting fitter and fitter and stronger and faster. That's what should be discussed. That's what's enabling the fact that we could run over the top of them. It wasn't Goody's masterstroke as coaching tactics or, that's, and again, it just that whole Grundy thing, I'd rather than not talk about Grundy and talk about the match. That would be better. And I know we'll talk about, but what a performance by our leaders in Maxi and Jack Viney. Every time I go to the footy, I think, how brilliant is it that we can be watching footy at the MCG with players like Track, Viney, and Maxi doing what they're doing. It's just fantastic.
I thought the other thing was with the 130 points, the big shootout effectively is what it turned into. Was when that gets thrown at us in the finals, that's exactly what we've got to overcome. That's the way Collingwood are going to play. Try and score heavily. Even Brisbane will try to score heavily. If they want to come shoot at us like the Tigers did, that'll be the outcome for you as well. And we're capable of doing exactly the same.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
George, echoing what Big Man said about you being a bit harsh on Richmond, Dr. Jim's blood surplus on Twitter in response to when I posted your match report said, I think that's a bit unfair to Richmond. They led for nearly the entire match and kept coming until the last 10 minutes. The D's were relentless. A great game. So don't often get some negative reviews of George's match reports. But
what surprised me was the individuals who Dustin Martin won them two grand finals off his own boot, and he is a great player, great generational player. But what really surprised me was, people like Grimes, 6 possessions for the whole game. He's their main.
But that was great work by Melksham. I mean,
But really what surprised me is when they were winning, that's what those sort of players, Cochin, 9 disposals for the whole game. That just tells me that they're on the way down a lot faster than what they think, because those players are no longer capable of providing what's necessary ultimately to win premierships, but to be competitive in the game. So, I just found it surprising how much they dropped off.
That's worth noting, though. They really miss Lynch, don't they?
Yeah, they've got nothing up. They've got nothing up forward.
Yeah.
They depend on all the smalls getting the scores, but I think the danger for them is their backline is so poor that they have to go attack in order to stay competitive in the games. But let's not talk about Richmond. Let's talk about us.
And for you, Bim Man, your mate David King, every Monday morning, him and Waitley give their seedings. So David King has put Melbourne in number 2, but he has said they're unlucky not to be number 1. So Kingy's back on board.
Let's just not forget.
He was
David
right off.
King predicted Freo, after they beat us, would take our position in the top 4. Let's just not forget that.
Okay, we won't. Well, let's stick with you, B-Man, and get into your stats files. So take it away.
It was a really fascinating game, and it was an unusual game in the sense that we just allowed it to be a shootout. I thought they were really aggressive with their ball movement. We were really aggressive with our ball movement. Some really similar stats as a result. The meters gains was only 430 difference, the differential, but our way, which is, I guess that's not a bad amount for us, but a lot of that was in that last quarter, we smashed them in the last 20 minutes of the game. Inside 50s, this was the big one. And this again was, I don't have the breakdown in the last quarter, but this huge number of these were won in the last 20 minutes. So inside 50s was plus 28 our way. And I think from memory, it was only plus 7 at half time, and it was around plus 6 or 7 for a big chunk of the match. And in fact, I think halfway through the third, I think I'm right in saying Tigers almost leveled up for inside 50. So from that point, from halfway through the third, we just completely dominated the match. And that's what really probably will get missed in the wash up, because they got out to that 20-point lead twice, and they felt like they were in it on the scoreboard. But if you look at the numbers, they progressively from halfway through the third quarter, we dominated that match statistically, as evidenced by the fact that we ended up plus 28 for inside 50s. We had 9 more shots at goal than them. We were very efficient as well. We contested possessions. This was what I was picking up on before. It was only plus 5 in the end, which is given, as I said, that we were plus 7 after about, I reckon, no more than 5-6 minutes of the game. For them to basically stay at that rate for the rest of the match is pretty impressive. It was only minus 3 ground ball gets. Big number for Richmond, big number for us. So that was so we were minus 3. They won 3 more than us. So that's an impressive stat from them. This was the interesting one. I thought it was a really unusual game for both teams, and they're obviously playing a bit differently with that very fast ball movement. That's where they're getting their efficiency from. You move it quickly. You're moving it into a forward line that's open. So you've got more opportunities for one-on-ones, and you're going to be more efficient. The more front half footy you get, the harder it is to be efficient. Like we started struggling with our efficiency as we got more inside 50s and more territory. But so it was only minus 2. They had 2 more intercept marks than us, plus 2 for intercepts for us. Centre clearances, we, despite Maxie's dominance, plus 3 only for centre clearances, stoppage clearances plus 6. So, that plus 9 altogether is good, but clearances was a really unusual game for us because clearances were really significant in the match. I thought this was fantastic for this, plus 7 for contested marks, and a lot of them were up forward. Only plus 14 for hitouts, and again, that was pretty much all that damage was done in the second quarter. Interestingly, minus 2 for hitouts to advantage was interesting. They had 1 more tackle than us, again pointing to their effort levels. And they were we were plus 4 for tackles inside 50, which is a big improvement on our number from last week. We might remember we only had 2 last week, I think, from memory, or even maybe 1. I think it was 13-1 last week. So Goody would be wrapped with 14 tackles inside 50, and remind me because Van Ruin wasn't one of them, and which is a bit of a concern for me. The defensive one-on-one losses was plus 8 our way. So defensively, we're pretty good in the one-on-one positions. The pressure, just on pressure points on ESPN's podcast, they do a footy podcast. I listened to it last week, and they had a segment explaining how the pressure points is worked out. So the pressure points are the weighed sum of pressure acts. Physical pressure acts are worth 3.75. And what the fella said was that's basically when someone's tackling someone. When physical pressure acts is when someone is physically touching another player. And he made the point that when you see 200 on the pressure rating scale, it's actually 2.0. It's just that they take out the decimal to make it, he said, to make it look sexier on telly. And so he made the point, if every single contest involved a pressure physical act, the total score for the pressure game would be 375. He said, but that's obviously not possible. But that gives us a good sense of how they calculate that number. He also made the point that increasingly this pressure data has been used for the clubs for ages. It's only been picked up on the telly in recent times, but the clubs put a lot of store in this. He was saying, maybe he's from Champion Data, so maybe he's got an agenda there, but he was saying the clubs do find it really important. He said that closing acts are when they're chasing from behind, they're 2.25 points, and corralling is when they are running at a player, so frontal pressure, that's a way of thinking of frontal pressure, and they're worth 1.2. The match was really interesting. I was really, really surprised at this. We opened with 183, which again, 180's considered average. He said on this show that 200, 205, and increasingly 210 is now considered at elite. Pressure's going up and up. He also made the point that a team like Essendon has really relatively low pressure ratings because of the speed at which they play. And so this is relevant for this number because this would apply to Richmond as well. They only managed 151 in that quarter. So 151 to our 183, which is a huge difference. That's a big differential. So it just showed we came out. What was super pleasing is we maintained that level pretty much through the whole match. This fella also said that it is a pretty good indication of work rate, the pressure ratings. So not always because of that running, the sole Essendon play, but we were 170 in the second quarter. Fascinatingly, I thought Richmond pumped up to 206 in that quarter, in the second quarter. So they really brought the heat in that second quarter. The Tigers, 188 to 190 in the third, 187 and to 176 in the third. So the match was, they just pipped us for pressure. So 181 to 183. So super impressive from that perspective. And it sort of goes to my point, though, and I'll talk about this a bit later, we're not fully wound up yet. So that's the scary thing for the other teams in the competition is we are not fully wound up, and I don't think we will be to the Blues game. That's my tip, is when we'll be out, almost at our optimal shape, optimal readiness and running over the ground. You won't be surprised at all. Who do you reckon number one pressure player was for the D's?
Jack Viney.
Jack Viney. So Stephen average 54, which is super high. Like that is like in the very elite pressure ratings for both the AFL and for the Ds. He piled on 62 pressure points, 28 individual pressure acts. Gus had another fantastic pressure game. So great leadership from Gus. His season average for pressure is 31. He had 29 pressure acts for 42 pressure points. Nibbler, my boy Nibbler, great game, fantastic game again. Really, he's been awesome in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Pressure, he had 16 pressure acts. Interestingly, so that's a relatively low number of pressure acts compared to, say, Jack Viney, but he managed 42 pressure points, and that speaks to the fact his frontal pressure he applies and the chasing pressure he applies. And so his season average is 46, so it was just slightly under that. Jake Bowie, who I thought didn't have a great game, to be honest, and he really coughed up some clangers, and including giving up a goal with that kick where he missed a D's player 20 metres and kicked it over his head. But this is why the pressure rating sometimes gives a different angle on it. So his game from a pressure perspective was great. 13 pressure acts, season average is 21.6, but he managed almost 40 at 39 pressure. So that was huge pressure by Bowie and big tick for him. As I said, I didn't think he had a great game, so that probably helps him in my eyes. And then finally, Langers, who he came in sixth spot, 15 pressure acts, 37, above his season average of 28. The time in forward half is a huge one for us. This is a big number for us. And the game didn't look like a Melbourne game in that first half. That open running style of footy is not the way that I think we'll be playing come finals. We'll talk about that a bit more later. But in the first half, it was 57-43 in the first quarter. Our way, 57%, 43%, 44%. And they, marrying up with their increase in their pressure, like they were 200 plus in the second quarter, the Tigers, they had 56% of the time the ball was in their forward half in the second quarter. But then, as I said, it started getting back on to our terms and starting to look like a Melbourne game in the second half, 62-38 in the third quarter. And in the last quarter, really, it was a much bigger smashing than what people, I think, are giving credit for Melbourne, as indicated by this. This was just how you want to see Melbourne play. 76% of the time in that last quarter, the ball was in our forward half, so only 24% for them. For the match, it was 61-39. that really speaks to the fact that they were gassed and that we were really, swarming on top of them. That was brilliant. Unusually, turnover scores was plus 14 our way, which is good for us, but that's not a huge number. 54 points from turnover isn't too bad. In fact, it's really good. So our season average is 54, and we managed 54 points in this game. Their season average is 42, and they scored 40 points from turnover. So that's pretty good going from them. But a lot of them, I reckon, were on the back of some pretty serious bad clangers from both teams in that first half. In particular, I thought from a Richmond perspective, that one that Melksham ended up smashing it over, and I forget who ran into the open goal, but he missed a player from 20 metres. It was horrible turnover from them. And a good time for us to get that. So the centre bounce attendances was really interesting. Talk about this probably more with Maxi, but he was at 92% of the centre bounces, which is just bananas, isn't it? His season percentage average is 58%. So not a million miles away from twice as much ruck work over the season in this particular game. Jack Viney was awesome in this game. 82% of all centre bounce attendances he was at. Above his average of 71.3. Gus was 74% of the centre bounces he was at, which is huge. His season average is 31. And this one I thought was really interesting because Track, he was at 69% of centre bounce attendances. So the sort of track forward experiment sort of wasn't talked about much, but he didn't play a great deal forward this week. The other expected score was interesting because it was bang on almost the scores, 119 to 83. So both teams were very efficient, 119. So we're only, 11 points. What was our final score, 130?
Yes.
Yep.
So, unusually for us, turnovers is normally, all the numbers are skewed a little in terms of the scoring because 130 points is a lot and we gave up whatever it was, 98 points. But this was unusual. This is a bit of a throwback to a couple of years ago. Scores from clearances were crucial in the game, with 21 of the game's 35 goals coming from stoppage situations, which is really, really unusual, particularly the way Melbourne like to play. And I can't remember if I mentioned this, but Melbourne only won the clearance count by 9. So despite Max's dominance, it's not like we completely smashed them in clearances. The final count for clearances was 49-40.
Does that conclude your stats files for this week, big man?
It does indeed. So a really curious game. I don't think there'll be that many more games, to be honest, that will look like that for the rest of the season. But I thought it was another fascinating game from a stats perspective.
All right, well, let's move on from the stats to our listeners' questions. And Bigfoot says, I think we need to take another moment to appreciate the efforts of our captain, fantastic Max Gawn. He was simply massive in the last half. His stats from that half are 23 disposals, 22 hit-outs, 17 contested possessions, 9 clearances, 379 metres gained, 7 inside 50, 7 score involvements. He has had more clearances than Richmond in the last quarter alone. Demon Source says he was incredible, noting the fourth quarter signature move of taking the ball from the centre ruck, kicking it inside 50 so that we score increments every stat above. The AFL is measuring his 7th All-Australian jacket right now and will reinstate Max as All-Australian captain and issue a public apology for the blip with giving it to Hawkins last season. So, I mean, what more can you say about our captain? He's absolutely thriving as the sole ruckman. I still think he gets an unfair treatment in the ruck contest. He was getting unfairly battered, in my humble opinion, in the first half. He stepped up in the last half and was the impetus for us getting the upper hand and putting the Tigers away in the last quarter. So, George, what's your thoughts on our captain?
Oh, no, how can you add any more to that? He was fantastic. He was up against a serious competitor in Soldo, particularly in that first half. But I remember at three-quarter time looking at the Richmond huddle, and Soldo and Bolton were completely on their knees. They were out to it, and all of a sudden you took out basically their two best players out of for the whole match. And then Richmond finished up using Bolter, and at one point Martin was even doing the rucking duties against Max. It was just too ridiculous to watch. But what happened, of course, was that Max went absolutely ballistic in that last quarter. He started to get those centre clearances, in particular, clearances around the ground, driving the ball with one of those, loopy kicks 50 metres straight into the forward line. It wasn't surprising that we finished up with so many forward entries, particularly in that last quarter. But yeah, he was treated horribly around the ground, particularly in that first half. How the umpires can talk about, blocking in a centre bounce situation.
What about that?
And yet the guy gets smacked around the head, left, right, and centre, and
the amount of blocking he gets is just unbelievable.
There was a throw-in in the first quarter deep in their forward line where he was blocked and knocked to the ground. It was a clear block any day of the week, and they got a goal.
There was one. It was a poor kick, and there was a number of poor kicks from us in that first half, which was frustrating. But there was one where I think it was May kicked to a contest, and Gawn ended up just not even bothering to try and get to the contest because he couldn't. He was blocked. The ball, he was being blocked before May even released the ball, and they marked it without anyone trying to impact the contest at all.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, and maybe we need to complain louder about it. But given the circumstances, like I said, as soon as I saw Soldo on his knees at 3/4 time, I thought that's it, it's all over.
Soldo
and it proved to be
in the last quarter. I rewatched the last quarter earlier today, and he was off for about 6 minutes in the middle of that. And then when he got up, 8 minutes by the time he got back on. But when he got back up to go back on, he was still breathing like he needed an aspirator or something.
Yeah. But still, Max took full advantage of that situation. But given that he's rucked 92% of the time, it was a monumental effort, physically. So it'll be interesting. We'll talk about this later on as we lead into the finals, what we do with the other options that we have.
I reckon that's a hugely important point for the way that game ended up for the second half, George, the way they used Soldo. Because the mate I was sitting with, the Tigers fan, he suddenly realised, at one point Martin took a ruck in. He's like, well, where's Soldo? And he's like, has he been subbed off? Is he injured? Well, no, he looks like he's not. He's on the bench. And I reckon tactically that was a huge mistake because they either blew him up in the first half and they couldn't, if they don't know how fit he is, they needed him so badly in the second half. And that's when the game turned in our favour. Halfway through that third quarter, with him off the ground for 8 minutes is basically when we wrested control back. And they got a goal that sort of felt like it was against the run of play. But I reckon that was a huge tactical error. It's like he had, so many petrol tickets and they used them all up in the first half and that was that.
And they actually doubled up with that failing because they subbed Miller out, who was their backup ruck, I think, in the first half. And then so they had to pull Bolter out to be able to provide someone in the backup. They lost a ruck. They timed it poorly, and then they've had to pull one of their defenders out. So Absolutely. It wasn't surprising.
And Bolter, and I'll talk about this a bit later, but Bolter had a shocker. And so he was not the person to be putting up against the rampant Max Gawn. And the thing I'm loving about Maxie at the moment is his marking's back. He's just grabbing them out of the air. It was just phenomenal performance.
Track Forever has a follow-up. Was that last quarter from Max on par or better than the third quarter in the preliminary final in 2021 against the Cats? I wonder if he can compare the stats and see. I don't think so. I had a look at the stats. Also, amazing job, guys. Love the pod. It makes the commute to work enjoyable. It's impossible to trump Max's performance in that preliminary final. He kicked five. He kicked 5 goals. He got into our first grand final in 20 odd years. It was a special night. Besides the 5 goals, it was 19 possessions. Yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating question, actually. So I had a look and I couldn't find, because the question was whether the third quarter, last quarter was as good as the third quarter, which I couldn't find the individual stats for the quarter. But just before, so I did have a look, but I just wanted to say really interesting element of this game, and it goes back to the fitness. Really, that comment I made last week that quoting Uze, that, they did a mini preseason in the middle of the year. So his ability to run that game out our ability to run that game out and smash the Tigers in that last quarter is on the back of incredible fitness, which we're now seeing the benefit of that mini preseason. So what really, I can't remember, I don't think you said this, Andy, at the top, but he was the third week in a row that Maxi played 100% of the final quarter, 100% game time in the final quarter, which is phenomenal, particularly given where those games were at. Maxi's influences on those, the results in all three games, and of course the significance of the results of all three games. I mean, we are in the frame now to finish second, arguably on the back of those three quarters, for remarkable. So, but as for the prelim in 21, it's a really interesting question and a great comparison between the two games. As I said, I couldn't find the stats for Maxi's third quarter.
Yeah, but Max kicked like 3 goals in that third quarter in the prelim.
Yeah, but for the entire match, comparing the entire match, remarkably, the player ratings in both games were the same, 24.4 in the 21 prelim against the Cats and in this game against the Tigers. And he received, of course, 10 coaches' votes in both games as well. But on paper, take your point about the 5 goals and the incredible third quarter in the prelim and the significance of it.
Well, that's the significance gets me. That's the preliminary final to get us into a first grand final in 20 years. It's hard to...
Yeah. So, but it's actually a really interesting comparison, because if you're thinking that's one of the best performances of Max ever, check these numbers out. So in that game, he had 348 metres gained in the prelim, in the 21 prelim. In this game, 541. Yeah. And that's gold. Yeah. Like, that's not Steve May kicking out from full back in this game. That is, that is just roll gold metres forward. Score involvements in that 21 prelim, he had 7. 10 in this game. Yeah. Inside 50s in that 21 prelim, 1, just the 1. In this game, he had 8 inside 50s. He had 19 disposals in the 21 prelim. He had 28 in this game. 12 contested possessions in that game, 22 in this game, 5 clearances in that game, 11 in this game, 33 hit-outs in that game and 40. So
stats-wise, it trumps it absolutely. I'm just talking significance-wise. It's hard. It's hard.
Not more significant than the other, but that wasn't the question, was it?
I know. I was comparing the last quarter from this game to the third quarter in that game. So, anyway.
So whatever way you cut it, he's a magnificent performance from our skipper. And I've said this many times, and I'll say it again, is I don't think, well, certainly in my lifetime of following Melbourne, and certainly I don't think in the AFL at the moment, there's not a single player who's more important to the success of a team than ever. The whole time I followed footy, there's not one player who comes close to the impact Maxi has on our chances of winning a flag.
Yeah, he goes down. I don't think we're a chance at all.
Well, of course.
We'd expect that from you, Andy.
We've got a bloody All-Australian running around at Casey.
That's true. George, anything you wanted to add to that about that question? So we got to follow up.
We could be here all night.
Yeah. So Back Naked wants to know how we rank that win. So the win, this win. Just want to say how awesome that was. It was a shootout and the Tigers brought everything they had. We took momentum back, absorbed the pressure and turned it around. The last quarter, it barely left our front half. Big shout out to Max and Jack, leaders extraordinaire. Great coaching by Goody, including the tactical sub use. How do you rank that win? I think it matches the Geelong win in 21. Now, I'm not sure if he's referring to the round 23 win or the preliminary final win in 2021. And whilst it was a great ring, I can't, like I said before, I can't rank it above either of those wins, whether he's talking about round 23, 21 or the preliminary final, just for the sheer exhilaration that I felt after both of those games. I doubt I'll remember this win in a few years, if I'm honest, and I'll never ever forget those 2 wins. So I don't know. How do you rank those wins by any of the Geelong wins
what's
in 21?
What's the more perfect outcome? It's next to impossible, isn't it? So, I as far as a win's concerned, I think the round 23 Geelong game was a better win. Yeah. There were more consequences to that. We won simply because we're the better side in this particular case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, absolutely. I mean, I can't believe you won't remember it in a few years, Andy. I still remember when...
Come on. Are you going to remember this Richmond...
the Swans when Roos were coaching.
That's different. That's a different type of... with the Hawthorn win when Roos... Yeah, I remember that. But this... Come on. You won't remember this in 2 weeks' time.
Well, I will, but hopefully. But
I'm not saying it wasn't a great game, remember, but it's not
the quality of game and our performance. Yeah. As in speaking of the 21 prelim, one of my favourite, well, in fact, my favourite by far, a million miles by far, memorabilia from that season was a print from a painting from Weber. It's on my wall in the footy room, in the TV room. I love it. It's the picture of Max picking up Viney. It's just that famous photo. I just absolutely love it. And I post on Demonland that picture after games that particularly, I find just amazing. And I didn't post it for this one.
Wasn't posted this week.
It hasn't reached the Weber picture threshold, that game. And I personally think our performance against the Lions and the Crows was more impressive football. It was a wonderful game of footy to watch, and it was fantastic to see us up and running again. But as in terms of a quality of a game, if it had finished at half time, it wouldn't have even been my top 50 games. It was a fantastic second half and fantastic last quarter. But I wouldn't put it up there in even my top 10 games or top 20 probably.
Well, if Big Man's not posting the photo, I'm not remembering the game. So let's move on to another captain. Singer says Jack Viney has been sublime in the past month. In fact, since Clary has been absent, possibly his best block of footy he has played at the club. He has been instrumental in willing us to win with his never say die demon spirit. He would have to at the very least be a consideration for the All-Australian squad. Very underrated in the wider AFL community, media and supporters. Galordi says, I thought he was dead in the third quarter. I didn't see what happened, but he was motionless for what seemed like 30 seconds. And then soon after, when he tackled with only one arm, I thought he might have injured his shoulder again, but no, he kept on going immense. And can't argue with any of that, Jack. He's absolutely stepped up in Clary's absence, and with Track playing more minutes up forward, there's not much more I can add without repeating what we've said about him in the past few weeks. He's a beast that bleeds red and blue, leaves absolutely nothing on the field. He's a guy you want in the trenches with you as you go into war, and I think I've run out of some cliches, so Big Man, take it away. Jack Viney.
So critical in the last month. I mean, really, if we end up finishing second, it'll be back on the back of this month of footy. So critical given that we've not had Clary in, that he stepped it up. But I reckon this was really underrated. I mean, people aren't crediting, for instance, the impact of Sparrow out. I mean, it was massive having Sparrow out in this game.
I think we felt it a bit as well early on.
We totally did. And look, we'll talk about Harmsy later, but Harmsy isn't playing at the level Sparrow is, and the impact, I think, as George has talked about, of Sparrow, he's like an impact player, and that's, so he basically Viney had to cover him as well. The other thing is it allowed Track to play forward against the Lions and the Crows. Viney's, without Viney performing to the level, well, Track doesn't go forward, and we probably don't beat the Saints even. Not the Saints. We probably don't beat the Lions if Track's not going forward. Just the last two games as an indication of how brilliant he's been. Against the Crows, he had 4 coaches' votes, 6 against the Tigers, 520 metres gained against the Crows, 560 in this game. And like I said about Max, that's roll gold metres gained. That's not, kick from the back half and you get 70 metres from your Steve May kick. He had 7 inside 50s against the Crows, 9 in this game, which is massive. 32 disposals, 27 against the Crows, 32 in this game. What I loved about this game is disposal efficiency was okay in the Crows game, 48%, given how much of his ball and disposals are under massive pressure. 48's okay. In this game, it was 68.8%, which is unbelievable. And against the Lions, it was 72%. And as again, for a player who's getting almost all his footy in the contest, that is, particularly for a player who's been criticised over the journey for his kicking, that's phenomenal numbers. That's really elite. Contested possessions against the Crows were 13, 10 in this game. 5 and 7 clearances in the last 2 weeks, and centre bounce attendances. This is really huge. 90% against the Crows and 82% in this game. I mean, what more could you ask from a leader, really? And some of, I don't know about you guys, but watching him crack in scares me from the top of the Ponsford. The way he cracks into contest, I'm surprised more players don't come off just never wanting to play footy again after playing footy against Jack Viney, fair income.
Isn't there a thread on Demonland, the Jack Viney made me cry thread?
Yeah.
A couple of his hits made me cry.
George,
and to back up Galordi's comments there, when I saw it and noticed it behind play, I wasn't interested in what was going on in play. He looked dead on the ground. He simply wasn't moving. And then you see the doctor and the trainers running out to him. You go, oh, no, this is something really, really serious. Lazarus was dead for 4 days before he was resurrected. Jack Viney gets up and goes straight back into the game. I thought the least he's going to do is be taken off the ground for a rest or something like that. No, he just went straight back into the next contest.
I'd take Viney over Lazarus.
It was just amazing. So,
that's about the 4th time that's happened. So he must have them. I don't know. Must have. He seems to have, like, it's in his shoulder. It's like maybe a pink nerve or something.
Yeah, something.
Remember we talked about there was one where I thought he busted his shoulder.
Yeah, because his arm was in, like, it's on radio, so I can't really show you what it's doing.
And what's surprising to me is if you've got any of that sort of situation with the shoulders, you wear strapping. Well, Jack doesn't wear strapping.
Strapping can't hold him.
Just on that.
I'd be dressed up like a mummy.
He was apparently cleared by the Port Adelaide doctor, so it's all good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just on that, when he went down, they stopped the play, and the commentators are all going, it's the bugbear of all these commentators. It seems to be exploding their brains about this sort of rule about stopping the play until it's cleared. Now, in some circumstances, sure, if that stops, allows teams to set up defenses or whatever. But as soon as the game stopped and there's any delay that happens, the clock stopped. So it doesn't really matter. I don't see why they're getting all...
It stopped at a boundary throw-in as well. So,
yeah, well, once the clock stopped, what does it matter? It's not like you're losing any time.
All right. George, did you want to add something? No? Okay.
Nope.
All right. The forward line. We have a number of questions and comments about the forward line. Some are about the wonderful performances that we witnessed on the weekend. There's so much to unpack because amongst the kudos for Petty, JVR and Melksham, there's also the prospect of Fritsch returning in a few weeks, and also the conundrum of Brodie Grundy and whether there is a place in the side, backup ruck or forward for him on the back of Max's incredible solo performances and Petty's form on the weekend. So I'll read the ones out about our forward line in this match and then get both of your thoughts on that. Then we can delve into the questions about what happens when Fritsch returns, and then I guess we can dive into the questions of where does that all leave Brodie Grundy. So I'll get started here. Red Jacket says, wow, what a forward line we have put together on the fly. 6 goals, Harris and Petty take a bow, 4 goals each to Rui and the incredible Melk, 14 goals between them. I had memories of Nita and Gaza with Petty and JVR with the 10 goals between them. Is this the forward line? Fritsch, return pending, of course. Travi14 says, love the pod, great work. I have long been a Petty forward hater and thought his talents as a backman were too good. Think I might be wrong. Supreme Demon says, was that Harry Petty's best game for the Demons as a forward? We would all love to be over the moon with Jake Melksham. We would all have to be over the moon with Jake Melksham's form in the team so far. Demon Source says, how good was it to see 2 key forwards who can clunk them and slot them? Ross Millian says, many Demonlanders knocked Melksham for his defensive efforts in the past. Clearly he is playing well and his elite finishing is a joy to watch. It's hard on TV from interstate to see how his defensive work and tackling pressure are going. Has it improved or on par? Galordi answers that one saying, Melksham's defensive actions, no tackles this week, but he has laid some in recent games, and I've seen him actually chase on occasion. Clint Biscuit says, is it a coincidence that Petty plays his best game forward while Tomlinson is back in a team as a third defender? And we've got a voicemail from Flash to play.
G'day, Andy and the boys. Flash from Queensland here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Harrison Petty is too good of a defender to be played forward. That's been my stance all year, and I know a lot of other Demon fans have felt the same way. Well, Harrison, he's officially changed my mind. That has to be the mix that we go forward with. It's not just his 6 goals, but his strength, mobility, and athleticism provides us something that we simply don't get from Ben Brown. I'd be interested to hear your boys' thoughts. As I said, I'm in Queensland watching on TV, not in person. But I think as long as Joel Smith remains the sub and we've got Tomlinson down back, we've got the flexibility. If defence is breaking down, Joel can come in, or Joel can go forward and Petty can go back. But I think that's it. That's where we go forward from here on. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And just as a side note, I can't see where Grundy and Fritsch fit back into the team. I know Bin Man likes to say Grundy's definitely going to come back, but I can't see them both coming in. I don't know who goes out for both of those boys. Love the podcast. Keep up the good work. Go D's.
Well, thanks for that, Flash from Queensland. We'll talk about the return of Fritsch later when he comes back later in the season, as well as where Grundy fits in a forward line mix shortly. But in this game, we had tall forwards leading, we had tall forwards clunking marks, and most importantly, we had tall forwards accurately kicking for goal. It's manna from heaven for D's fans. 14 goals from our tall to medium forwards, 4 goals from our small forwards. There's not much more we could ask for. Not so bad from a team that has no forward line, like many pundits posited that we would struggle to kick winning scores. Well, 130 points is a massive score to kick against a side that doesn't rhyme with wet toast. So, George, and then perhaps you, Big Man, have we found our best tall forward mix? And keep in mind, we'll talk about Fritsch's return and the Grundy conundrum shortly, but just these two, JVR and Petty, is that the two tall forwards out of the mix of players we've got?
I think after this match, that would have to be the undoubted conclusion. I would go back just with a little bit of trepidation. I thought Richmond's defence was pretty damned ordinary. That caused such a fantastic outcome, partially for us. If you look at Petty's goals, it was a great snap. There was a fantastic contested mark, but 4 of the others came from marks which were almost uncontested. So you can't complain about what Petty was doing by any stretch of the imagination. I just expected more from Richmond for it. The same with JVR's marks. They were almost identical. Next to uncontested marks, Bolter was useless. Grimes was less than useful at all. Melcham had a party out the back because nobody was on him for a good proportion of it. That you allow someone like that out the back, again uncontested was beyond me. Yeah, but anyhow, look, this was the best forward line structure that we've seen. The other thing I found really surprising was how far up the ground these guys were playing. There was times when both JVR and Petty were in the defensive goal square. It's something that you wouldn't have seen from Ben Brown or from even from T-Mac, because they just can't get that far up the ground. But it was surprising to me that they were actually going that far up the ground and were being allowed to do that. So that was interesting. But their marking was just first class. The fact that they were able to mark, quite often close in, within reasonable kicking distance, certainly helped with the accuracy, because we weren't kicking, take out Melcham's kicks from the boundary line. We weren't kicking from out wide. We were kicking from straight in front. So the accuracy, as a consequence, increased. The other thing that it told me is there is no room up forward for 2 rucks who aren't forwards playing in a forward line with those 2 players in there. So let's leave the rucks out of it and let the rucks go ruck, and we'll leave the forwards to do the rucking. But at the moment, we've got 2 very, very good tall options up there, and the way that it's working was only proven on the weekend.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I know there's a follow-up question.
Yeah, do you want me to do that, or do you?
Do that, because
and then you can. We'll just get that out of the way. So, Engorged Onion wants to spoil our petty party and says to play devil's advocate, what's the body of evidence that Harrison Petty can excel as a forward? Are we delightfully reading too much into one game? Please discuss, panel. That's an interesting thing. It's one game and we're going gaga next week. That's
he
not.
Did look like in that Hawks game, he played pretty well. So, yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, so I've got an open mind still about the forward line. So, first of all, on Melksham, I think he's been brilliant. Like he's really been impressive. It's not great that he didn't have a tackle, but his kicking is critical. It's just so important. I mean, like it can't be it cannot be, it's so important. Like those kicks from the boundary line. I was confident he was going to get both. And one of them was directly below me. And it was just a thing of beauty. He's got such a good routine. He squares himself up. Both of them I thought he was going to get, and both of them went straight through. And I loved his cockiness. It sort of spoke to what I was saying about the arrogance of the team. Or you see he's rocking his head and he looked hyped. But the big thing about I think is becoming really important. I mean, I really love his aggression, Melk's aggression, but he did another great job on a dangerous intercepting defender. He killed Grimes. Like he didn't give Grimes anything. And Grimes is such an important player. Take your point, George, that Grimes didn't play well, and he perennially looks grumpy. Grimes like someone's stolen his lunch at school, but I thought he gave Grimes a bath, and he was in his face. He was physical. If he couldn't market himself, he made damn sure that Grimes couldn't. And he also he hits contest like he wants to hurt someone in the contest, which I think that aggression is something that Goody really loves and really emphasises. And I've been really impressed with Melksham. The classy finishes. We could win a grand final with that sort of kicking. So he's gone along. He wasn't in my best 22, but he is now.
I love the way he snaffled that deliberate out of bounds from Petty, who created the
that was Petty's
tackle.
kick.
Yeah. but given his kicking, that was a far better outcome, I think, than having Harris and Petty take that shot. Felsham was the man for the job.
Look,
so on Petty.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you
Andy,
go.
You go.
No,
John
you go.
Petty, he was unquestionably he was awesome. And as some pundits in the heard noted that he moves like a forward, so he's on the move. And I watched him it was great because in the Ponsford they were really close to goal a lot of the time. So it was funny. Like you're right, George. They got right up the ground. Melksham took a really important intercepting mark at one point. It was like, where did they come from? They swamped up, which is only possible again when you're super fit. Like they just showed they wanted to flex. That felt like that whole match to me was the D's flexing over Richmond. And maybe what you're saying, George, is it's Goody's flexing and saying, well, Richmond have been a hard team for us to beat. It seems like Richmond, when we first beat them, was when we started turning the corner and believing in 21 that we were the real deal. And it's like we're going to keep them under the thumb, as long as we can, which I love. I love that attitude. So he's clearly got Petty. It's got forward smarts, and it's worth remembering. I think I'm right, George, Andy, in saying that wasn't he a forward as a junior?
So I was speaking to a mate today about this. So I'm pretty sure he was a forward as a junior, but the under-18 carnival, he was an All-Australian centre-half back, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
yeah.
He unlike Brodie and unlike Max, he looks for opportunities. He moves. He looks like a forward. I love his kicking. It's so neat. And it's very similar to JVR's. And again, the angle I was sitting was a couple of his goals where I was dead on and they didn't deviate from straight. And not only did he kick straight, but he looked confident that he was going to kick straight. And I love, unlike Harms, who I had no confidence he was going to get either of those goals because of his body language didn't look confident. And again, as I said before, I love the fact that he put the hand up to the ear to the crowd, and he gets into players' faces. Players hate him. He rattled Boulder. But I'd say I'm just really on picking up George's point. Really, is there's a bit of a caveat on that performance. Great, fantastic. I've joked on Demonland that I'm going to start a band called the Petty Forward Experiment. I'm all in. Supporting the Petty Forward Experiment will be the Grundy conundrum, but I really rate Boulder as a player. But he had a shocker. He had an absolute mare. As I said, I was in the Ponsford in the first and third quarters down our end. Boulder was all at sea. I don't know what he was doing, like whether he was rattled or, including giving away that 50. And on that, by the way, I watched the replay, and Jones, I love him, great, but he's not a commentator's, he's just a shocker. And he was saying that was a soft free kick. That block, the 50 metres that Petty got against Gawn, that was a 50 metres all day, every day. Come on, Jones, what are you talking about? But so that's a slight caveat because like George said, he took a couple of easy marks that were not AFL standard pressure on him. Like one of them was even the mark, the screamer he took, in footy these days, it's incredible. No one gets, run-ups on footy anymore, on to be able to jump on. And the same with JVR. Like, who gives him space to run at a pack and jump on a pack? I agree with what you're saying, George. They were really disorganised defensively. Like a couple of those goals where Harms should have kicked, for instance, they were kicks to no one in the corridor. I thought they were all over the shop defensively, which really helped all our tall forwards, in particular Petty. So, but, I keep him up forward. I also love JVR, but without being a Debbie Downer, a reference for Thornbury Tom. You can't knock 4 goals. That's great. His ruck work was okay. I wouldn't, say it was awesome, but it was okay. But his lack of pressure really, really concerns me. After a low pressure game last week that I noted, he had only 2 pressure acts in this match. And that's and 5 pressure points. He averages 22 pressure points per game, which is not really good enough. He only had 5 pressure points in this game. He was on the ground for, I think 60, 70, 80% of the time. That's just not enough. Only 1 tackle. That's not going to get it done in the pressure of finals. Yeah, he had 4 goals, but he only had 4 in score involvements, which were those 4 goals, and he only had 7 disposals. As I say, I'm not sure that those numbers do the job in finals. And so back to the Grundy conundrum, I think Grundy will come in for JVR. I know people won't like that, and I know JVR's the future. He's a beautiful kick as well. But a couple of his marks, like, again, it was just pathetic defence work from the Tigers. And as I said, those pressure numbers, if those numbers were Melksham, we would be calling him out for that. So I reckon to be honest, he's lucky to be held his spot. 4 goals, as I said, is you can't knock that. But, for me, that's a bit of a worry.
I've always given a bit of a pass to those lack of pressure or low disposal games, as long as they're hitting the scoreboard. It's when they're not hitting the scoreboard that it becomes a much bigger problem. But I understand what you're saying. Well, let's get into Fritch's return and the other forwards. Scroll says, what a fantastic win. Can't wait to listen to this podcast. I know he's still a few weeks away, but can we play Fritch and Melksham in the same team? Melksham has been huge this past month. Horny for Gorney says, if the forward line continues to play near this level in the next couple of weeks, does Fritch's walk-up start go away? Melk is putting together a nice block of form, and he isn't a perfect swap for the bigger Petty/JVR. Monocular says, looking forward to the podcast more than ever before, as there are so many things to celebrate and to speculate on for the remaining games. Win the next 7, and cup emoji, cup emoji, cup emoji. Delivery into forward 50, still a bit to work on through, having Harry Petty and JVR actually moving, making a lead into whatever limited space there may be, does give those upfield something to consider. Where does Fritter fit in? Some sort of rotation with these two. Ben Brown looks like a break glass option now, as does T-Mac if he gets back on his feet. Can't really see a spot for Spargo now. Fat Tony says Chandler has already kicked more goals this year than Spargo has kicked in a season. Petty gave us more as a forward against Richmond than Brown ever has. More goals, marks and Supercoach points. Surely B-Man will have to concede that we are better without Brown and Spargo now, especially given we need to fit Oliver, Sparrow and Fritch back into the 22. Grundy is also a possible in. If he persists with our 2021 champions, Andy needs to hold him to account of who goes out, because there are only 23 spots available. So last week, Bailey Fritch was still listed as 4 to 5 weeks away with a foot injury. With 4 games to go and a week off before final, that brings him into the mix in either the last round or the first week of finals. Tom McDonald is 2 to 3 weeks away, but has not played since round 11 after surgery on his ankle, so I'm sure there's a bit of fitness work that's got to go there. Ben Brown was dropped for the Tigers from the Tigers game. Doesn't look 100% right. Didn't kick a goal in the twos this week. So in terms of medium forwards, what does Bailey Fritch's return mean for Jake Melksham? Can they play in the same side, Bidman?
Yeah, I think they can. There's the question about who comes in and out is an interesting one, but I think they can play in the same side, because Melk's role, as I said, is really as a defensive forward. He's, there's been all the talk this week, or at least David King and others are pointing out the fact of how critical now it's become to stop the intercepting defenders, as we've talked about on the podcast a few times with, the players like Andrews and, Alir, those sorts of players, Stewart, and Melbourne as well, the levers and May, it's becoming critical to negate the opposition's intercepting defender, and Melksham's played that role brilliantly, really. So they play different roles. So yes, I can see them playing together. Not sure what that means for Brodie, but as I implied just before about my comments about JVR, I'm feeling he's going to be the unlucky one.
We'll talk Brodie in a minute.
Brodie will come back in. So I think they can for sure.
Georgia, I'll go. Go ahead, Josh.
I think it'll be easier than that. While Melcham's playing the way he is at the moment, doing what's required, then he'll stay there. I think Woden will, by the time we get to finals, will be the obvious out in the forward line, and that creates the space necessary. You can't expect a kid in his first year effectively to be, to come in and play that many games. He's doing all right at the moment, but if Bailey Fritsch is available and back to form, then I think you'd naturally have Fritsch in there.
And I think you make
Jake
a really
Bowie.
good point, George. The Goodies philosophy is that if you earn your spot, you keep it, don't you?
Yeah.
And so Melksham's in until he has a run of games where the argument isn't as strong. So the worry I have a little bit about Petty forwards, I'm fully on board the Petty experiment for, if you get data and you need to change your view, and not like it, I'll absolutely thought he's a better defender and the three tall defenders. But he was awesome. The query I have though is what it does mean for our backline, because to be honest, I'm not convinced by Tomo down back. And so who then plays that third tall role? So that's a question mark for me about what it means for our defence, to be honest.
We'll talk a bit more about that with changes with Hibbo sort of on the cusp of return, because perhaps he can fill that role. But let's move on. George, we spoke about the performances of Petty and JVR, and barring injury to those two, have we seen the last of premiership forwards Ben Brown and Tom McDonald?
Well, we don't know about Tom McDonald. He's obviously back training and has been running for a couple of weeks, so we won't know the situation there until let's hope something happens or not happens, more to the point. I can't see Ben coming back. I watched half of the game against Casey, and he finished up for the whole game with 3 disposals.
Tough old day down there.
It was a tough old day, but
that's what tall forwards.
Yeah, but it's at both ends of the ground, unfortunately, for him. He looked like, at half time, he could barely get off the ground, just to run off the ground. He simply looked completely shot. That knee injury, which he's struggled with for the last 2 years at least, and probably beyond that, I think has finally got to him. We saw one champion of the game retire today, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if Ben pulls the plug at some stage. But we'll wait and see. Tom McDonald, I think, is going to become the break glass in event of.
Or unless he might play back, George.
He's the other option. Yeah,
he was a gun centre half back for a long time who couldn't kick, frostbite kicking when he went down back.
So if he's fit, we may well need Tom McDonald, but at the moment, based on what just the vision I saw from the Casey game, I can't see Ben Brown coming back. He's certainly not offering anything that Petty up forward is currently doing.
So big man, are you still bullish on Spargo returning to the side, barring injuries? Who is he replacing?
Yeah, I think I'm convinced he'll come back in. Obviously, may well be proven wrong. The idea that it's important, like I've made this point before, he and Chandler, they're not competing for the same spots. Chandler is a classic small forward, and that's how he played. He played great. They're not in the competition for the same spot, not directly, not like in terms of you take him out, you replace him. So I think Spargo does come back in. We miss his defensive running. That their roles are different, as I said, with Spark. So I think that he will replace Wowie. Who knows how all of the dominoes fall and what that means. I mean, it's too far out to start going, well, what does this mean? It's too, you can't be black and white. But I think my view is that Spargs is in Goody's best 22. I watched Wowie really closely in this game. He played exactly Spargo's role, and I don't think he's got the tank to do it. But he played well, and he did. He worked really hard. But I think they're actually. I think big kudos to the club this year. They've really lived the squad mentality. There's talk that they would have given House a run before his injury. They've given Wowie time. They've shown the commitment to him. I think JVR's in the same boat. They're giving him games now that will fast track his development. And I think ultimately Spargo will come back in and who comes out in that scenario, it would be Wowie.
All right, the Brodie Grundy conundrum. Pew 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 says, looking forward to another stellar podcast from you, gents. My question tonight is, given Max's incredible solo performances in the ruck over the past few weeks and Petty and JVR's 10-goal 1-2 punch as tall forwards, where does that leave Brodie Grundy? Is there a role for him this season as either a backup ruck to Max or as a third tall in the forward line? Supreme Demon says, the Brodie Grundy conundrum, what do we do with him? Can we play two ruckmen in our team? What level of forward craft does Brodie Grundy need to meet so that he can get back into the AFL senior side? Wells 11 says, a question about the future planning and how to work our Max conundrum. Playing Max solo seems like our best chance of winning another flag. Do we try to hold on to Grundy for a couple of years as backup? Will we even have a choice, as he may well want to leave? If this plays out as now increasingly expected, then any decent ruckman will also fear being stuck in the VFL and may not want to come to us. I'm loving the now after a great win, but how to plan ahead. That might be a bit too difficult for us to sort of forecast. But so, George, what does this all mean for Brodie Grundy? Is there a place for Brodie Grundy in the best 22? Obviously, as a replacement for Max, if God forbid he gets injured, but barring injuries or resting Max in the lead up to finals, can you see a place in the side for Brodie, and what does that mean for his future at the club?
It's the real conundrum with this. I think this whole Grundy playing forward is a load of whatever you like to call it, because it just simply hasn't worked. He hasn't shown anything at Casey, and you wouldn't expect him. I didn't expect him to show anything in any case, playing forward down at Casey. This, to me, was all about providing Grundy with a rest in the lead up to finals. Even when he's situated in the forward line down at Casey, he's getting a rest. He's not, and in this game this week, although I only saw the first half, apparently he rucked all in the second half. So he's coming back as a ruck, not a forward, because he didn't do anything in the forward line. And post this game against Richmond, we don't need resting ruckman in the forward line. You might use it occasionally, but you're not going to use it for half the game. I'm guessing at the moment we might see more resting off the bench rather than resting on the field with the ruckman. You can't expect Max to play, particularly when you get into finals, 92% of the game time and 100% of a quarter in the ruck. Yeah, and you can't expect to drag a 19-year-old JVR into the ruck against, in a finals competition as the backup.
Petty.
Or have Petty. Yeah, exactly. So I can see Grundy coming back in, but as a ruckman, as a almost a backup ruckman off the bench, and to be used sparingly in certain times.
Exactly.
That's it. Yeah.
I totally agree, George. And I reckon I've been thinking about it as the Grundy conundrum. The more I think of Goody, like he's playing 5D chess, I reckon maybe he's put it out there just to mess with people's heads. Because, I mean, the whole narrative of him going back, we fed that to the media. I mean, like he was never going back to play forward for the first week, for God's sake. There wasn't even a Casey game to play forward in. They had to bloody do a scratch match against St Kilda, So it's like, and that's the point, George, is you can't. What do fans expect, that Gawn is going to be able to play 100% of fourth quarters for the rest of the season? No, I think they've targeted this stretch of matches. It will be part of their, not just Brodie's training program to get him as fresh as possible, but to give Max a good run and through this period to make sure we win these matches, which we can tick all of them, those boxes. His job when he comes back in, particularly we've got a pure forward. If you consider Petty as a pure forward, you only need the one really in footy these days. Look at Norton; he can barely get a mark-up forward. He's the best forward in the league, arguably, or at least he was last year in terms of how people talked about him. Kerno's probably got that now, but if he comes back in, it will be a resting ruckman, give Max a chop out, and to smash bodies down forward. I think the key comment about Max Grundy was Goody's comment in a presser, I forget, maybe it was after the Saints game or the following week, where he said, in the finals, you need big bodies. You need big, strong men playing footy, and he's a big, strong fella. So, I think it's a lot ado about nothing, to be honest. And,
All right, let's move on. Lazy says, what has changed in the way that we play? I don't believe our defence is playing as well as they could, but I can't help but think that these high scores we are conceding are partially by design. Are we pressing higher up the ground? Are we playing faster and embracing the imperfections more? A month ago, I wouldn't have fancied Melbourne in a shootout, but now we seem like a team that doesn't care how many points the oppo scores as long as we score more. And what says, given that our desire to be more aggressive going forward means we are obviously able to be opened up going the other way, if only conceding less than 70 points was the old defensive requirement, is conceding less than 100 the new maximum? Ross Millen says, is it concerning that we have coughed up over 90 points in each of the last 3 games, or have we found a new way to win in a shootout? I feel like we have multiple ways to play now, but I'm not sure what our DNA is this year. I'm interested for a prediction on when the experimentation will stop, if at all, and what our finals game plan will look like. Bim-Man, this question's right up your alley. About a month ago, you predicted we'd play more offensively, and we've seen that play out over the last few weeks, leading to bigger scores. The downside to this attacking style is that we'll inevitably have bigger scores kicked on us on the rebound.
Yeah, look, we won't want to play like this come finals. And, I'm loving, it's great to go watch the footy and open games of footy and back and forth. Richmond were extremely efficient in this game, and they scored 23 times from just 45 inside 50s. I mean, that's crazy. And the way playing like that is just not sustainable against the better teams come finals. In part, their ability, their efficiency, like we gave them so many goals through our aggression. And, that's in part their ability to be efficient was the space that they had in the forward line. But that was because of the way we were playing. And that was, as noted in the questions, our aggressive high-risk ball movement. The fact that we constantly had the ball in motion, we generated most of that, and we allowed them. We didn't try to slow them down or stop them, or we didn't apply hardly any frontal pressure like we will against Collingwood, like we did on King's birthday. We allowed that game to be an open, flowing game. We drove it. And like I said at the top, felt like a really sort of statement game. We flexed and we said, we'll go for it. You want to play a high open game? We can do it. Well, let's play high octane footy. Let's go for it. The perfect, and as noted by, I forget who, but it's a really good point, really aggressive high press. So, we did the Collingwood thing, which I think is their biggest vulnerability. They press up so defensively high and they allow goals out the back. And that's how Carlton got them. It's a huge problem for them. And it will be for us if we play like that, and we won't play like that. And the best example of what I mean is that goal to Dusty when he was left alone in the goal square when the ball got out the back and kicked to him. And when was the last time you can remember us giving up a goal out the back with a player of any standard, let alone Dusty's, by himself in the goal square? We just don't do that. Collingwood do that all the time.
Usually we've got the player where Dusty is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've almost always got the goalkeeper ourselves who plays back. That's exactly our model. Collingwood gave up like 5 or 6 of those goals against Blues. It's what lost them the game. So that's the downside of playing that aggressive, fun to watch football is defensively it opens you up. And it really needs to be remembered. The only, if our accuracy was as poor as it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we'd probably lose that game of footy. Right. And so no way Goody does that come finals. So as I said, it felt to me like it was almost arrogance from us. So we basically said to the Tigers, look, let's see if you can go with us. And extreme confidence in our fitness that they wouldn't be able to come the last 20 minutes, that we'd run over the top of them. And it was true, wasn't it? I mean, how like that, they were out on their feet. And once was a classic example of what I mean about when you have a fitness advantage over the opposition. It was once they were out on the feet and they're gassed. George's point about Soldo's a perfect example of that. We opened the game up because they couldn't go with us. The goal where Cos got his goal out the back, where it tic-tac, and I think it was Track who kicked it to him. That the young Tigers player shouldn't have pressed up on track, and he left his player, or sorry, whoever it was. I think maybe it was even Wowie, and it got out the back to track, and track kicked the cos. That's a classic way that we generate our goals. In that last quarter, that's how we want to play our footy. That's our premiership model. So in that, I felt like, for me, it really started feeling like a much more Melbourne game from about halfway through the third quarter. We really looked like we tried to compress and create density in the second half, and we stopped their momentum. So it was in that moment, in that period, we got control of the game. We stopped their momentum, which is what we're historically under Goody so good at. When we're playing our best footy, is we stop them in their tracks of not being able to take advantage of their momentum, hold them, and then go nuts and take advantage of it, exactly like we did kicking the last 6 goals. I really love the fact that we played tempo footy, albeit really late in the game, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, that kicking back. That is what Melbourne do. So I don't think we're quite there yet. As I said before, I reckon we're really close to our optimal, best running over the ground, power and speed and aerobic fitness. I think we'll be in that, for the Carlton game. We're now playing that sort of expansive footy, which is great, but we're playing it like we did in the first third of the season. But simply we're able to, because we've got the legs to implement that method, which we just didn't have in the middle of the season when they're doing that mini pre-season. And of course, the media talking about it drives me nuts. This game is part of the bigger picture. But I think, as I said, we'll be at our peak against the Blues. But as we move towards the Blues, I think the experimenting will stop a little bit. So we're experimenting way, way more than we ever have under Goody, with role, strategy, method. And I don't think we'll nail down that method until we're closer. But I fully expect us to return how we were playing in the first third of the season, with a much better balance between defense and offense, and a return to controlling the tempo of the match when we need to. And on Goody's experimenting, I have a real theory about this, is that now people are starting to talk, well, people have worked out Collingwood. You know what to do now. The blueprint, Melbourne showed them that you pressure them at the source. You don't let them feed them out. You pressure the player who's the receiver. You create density and squash up on them, and you take out their intercepting defenders. Well, I don't reckon Goody's allowing other teams to look at what our best football looks like. Like, how would you now pick how Melbourne plays? So tactically, it's really hard for the Oppo coaches, I think, to go to work on us, whereas everyone can see, what Port are doing. Everyone can see what the Lions are doing, and everyone can see what the Pies are doing. So, really clever coaching by Goody, and fantastic fun to watch, I reckon.
Got a question. We've got a voicemail to play from Enzo about the umpiring.
G'day, Andy, Bin Man and George. What a great win. My heart was in my mouth. I couldn't listen for the first half. What a great game by Petty. And to all those Richmond supporters complaining about the umpiring costing the game, the free kick count was 9-11. I hardly doubt it cost us 1 Melbourne the game. What do you reckon? Go D's.
At one stage, they were 7 frees to 2, and we got a free kick, and the Tigers supporter near me, with face tattoos, mind you, he was carrying on like a European soccer player who barely got clipped. He was yelling at the umpires, saying, they've been giving us freebies all blinking day. And I didn't have the heart to correct him. He didn't seem like the kind of guy who liked to be informed that he was wrong by someone with good dental hygiene. So, George, what are your thoughts on the umpiring on the day?
Have we got another hour or so? No, we haven't. So let's keep it short. There were obviously a lot of holding the ball decisions which just weren't paid. Every time a Richmond player tackled a Melbourne player, that was obviously holding the ball, because I can hear all this yelling around the ground of ball, ball, ball. It would have been interesting if we'd been actually in Western Australia between balls and boos, you wouldn't know what was going on. Look,
and
the fact. Yeah, and Roos. Yeah, look. At the end of the day, there were 11 free kicks to 9. Was it? Yeah, that's pretty low, I think, in a game of football. So, it was neither here nor there. I just wish the umpires would have some interpretations, rules, or whatever, which make their job a lot easier. We've talked about this before. Even things like the centre bounce. Unfortunately, umpire Nichols cannot bounce the ball, so why put him in there? There's 2 umpires in the middle of the ground, so get the other guy who can bounce the ball to bounce the ball. Same with when Ray Chamberlain's in there. He can't bounce the ball, so get someone else to do it. These sort of simple things that take away the fans in the outer getting upset about umpires. We've talked about the intentional or insufficient intent about change the rules so that it's the same as the AFLW, so it's easy for the umpires. Who complains about out of bounds on the full now? Nobody, because that's what the rules.
That they didn't pay. Like they did pay some, and there was one where I forget which of the Tigers player kicked for goal. Like he kicked it in the point. Maybe they were saying he was kicking for goal and he just missed it. But like there was no one forward of the ball, and he ended up going in Bolton, I think it was. He kicked to the pocket. It went 30 metres from the goal into the pocket, and surely to goodness I was expecting him to pay deliberate.
Yeah.
I thought I actually claim credit for the turnaround in the umpiring, because on the scoreboard at halfway through the third quarter or whenever it was, it flashed up 7 free kicks to 2. And I said to whoever I was sitting with, hold on, that can't be right. That's not this quarter. There hasn't been 9 free kicks this quarter. I said, no, it can't be right. And I said, well, that can't be right, because there's no way we've only got 2 free kicks halfway through the third quarter. And someone checked the app or whatever, and said, sure enough, it was 7-2 at that point. And I yelled out some stupid comment about the free differential. And from that point on, we just kept on getting free kicks. So I take credit for that.
Weren't you up in the top of the Ponsford? I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly. So that just shows how loud I was in the influence that other game. But what I thought was actually the umpiring was pretty good. I thought in that it was 2, and I thought to myself, well, I couldn't think of many free kicks that we didn't get that I was annoyed about, except for what George just said. They just stopped paying holding the ball.
Yep.
Like, what is going on? It's like people, they're just not paying holding the ball. And there were so many, both ways, to be honest, that where it should have been paid holding the ball. So, that, to me, I didn't actually think I thought the umpiring was pretty good. And certainly from that point, because we got, ended up, we got 9 more to their 4 or something after that point. The only 2 frustrating ones for me was both ways with the bounce in the middle. They got a goal where it should have been recalled. And I think we did too, though.
Yeah.
That was 50-50.
Was Nichols the umpire that time when Max Gawn thumped it?
Yes.
Yeah. He still can't bounce.
One thing, though, that
he hasn't forgiven him since.
No,
One
he
thing that I
hates
did
us.
laugh at, though, and I had to yell out, I couldn't, it does my head in, is like, the Richmond fans were yelling ball for everything. And at one point, Rivers kicked the ball. Like, he kicked it 30 metres and they were screaming ball. It was like, come on, like, I just, like, the rule is pretty clear. If you kick the football, you can't have it bloody holding the ball.
Yeah, there was another guy near me who a Melbourne supporter early on called ball, and it wasn't ball. And this Richmond supporter turns around to him and yells at him, no prior opportunity. But then every second, any time a Richmond player just touched a Melbourne player with a finger, this guy's calling ball. So, yeah, they have.
And ironically, it's not generally the free isn't holding the ball, is it? It's what isn't it? It's not disposing of it correctly, which is much harder to yell out.
Yeah. Demonic Final Fantasy says, I feel Langdon is about 75% of his usual self from past years. His fluidity and accuracy seems to be lacking, and he sometimes looks lost and all at sea in positioning. I can only see the game on TV, so don't get a full or true perspective. He's a player that we admire for his athleticism and ability to move the ball forward to our favour, but it doesn't seem to be happening of late. Increased pressure, different role, my own skewed perception. Keep up the good work, guys. Then 15 hours later, he's answered himself and he's followed up his own post with the following. Having viewed the replay again, he's more often than not behind the ball in a more defensive role, which doesn't free him up to run with the ball if it comes out the back. Coupled with being on the non-preferred wing, it's possibly a reason why he doesn't get into the usual Demonland votes as often these days. Curious if it will change heading into the finals. Cheers, guys. Now, I thought Ed Langdon did play a great game on the weekend. 25 disposals, 15 pressure acts, 5 tackles, 4 intercepts, 4 score involvements, 3 inside 50s. He is playing a more defensive role on the wing, often getting back deep into defence to help out. And with Lockie Hunter playing the more offensive role, the offensive wing role, it's allowed Ed to play this more defensive role. And we talked about it after the Hawthorn game. I noticed it particularly that day because I was sitting behind the goals, and it's probably less noticeable on TV for Demonic Final Fantasy. So, yeah, George, your thoughts on Ed Langdon?
Oh, he's certainly playing. This was probably the best game I've seen in quite a while from Ed, but I think any game that he plays, it's a consequence of what else is happening around the ground. I will guarantee you absolutely every other coach in the AFL would be instructing their defenders and forwards, do not kick the ball down the Langdon wing. We do not want the ball in his hands under any circumstances because he is so very good at running and gaining so much meterage. So, you would have seen the ball heading down the other side of the ground much more often than what we as Melbourne supporters would like. But I don't think Ed's changed anything in the last 12 months, and we've adjusted to that because that means if Ed's not getting the ball in his usual position, then you run him more defensively to cover off. So it doesn't look as good from the fans' perspective, but yeah, he's still doing exactly what he needs, and we saw a lot more of it in this game. So perhaps the Richmond coach, the new one, didn't quite know about Ed Langdon until this game.
Yeah, and look, that's exactly right. And you made the point a number of times early in the season, George, that was the brilliance of bringing Hunter in. Because it's not just the opposition who are not going down Ed Langdon's wing, it's also us. So I haven't heard anyone on Demon Land for ages complain about May kicking it to the one spot on the half-back flank. That's because we're being a lot more unpredictable in which channel we move the ball forward. You know, we're using both wings more. We are sometimes choosing to go through a Hunter's wing, but you know, I think it's more, it's exactly right. His role's changed a little bit and he still does that unrewarded defensive running. It's just that it's more often on the opposite side to where the ball is.
Golly says, my question is, how isn't Joel Smith in the starting 22? Jane02 says, hi guys, great podcast, highlight of my week during my long drives into the city. I'm also curious as to why Joel Smith has not been considered as a regular inclusion. I think he has been great. He's obviously fit and injury-free at the moment. Is he destined to be the sub for the rest of the season? Rhino answers that stating because he is the difference as the substitute. And look, there's no doubt that Joel Smith is the perfect substitute for this team with his seamless ability to be used as a forward or a back, tall or short. And my fear with playing with a player playing solely as the sub is that they don't get that full game, whether for fitness or just touch, footy fitness basically. And I don't know how long we can go without either him playing a full game in the ones or the twos. And I'd love to see him get a full game in the ones. And we probably have a few opportunities in the remaining 4 weeks to give him a full run. So, Big Man, what are your thoughts? Joel, we love him as a super sub, obviously, but about getting
I'm a
game
massive
time
Smithy
into him.
fan, and I happened to look back at the 2018 team, and he was in that team at the beginning. The first round of 2018, Smithy was in that team, which is funny to think because he's played so little footy.
Well, that's injuries of cruelty.
Yeah, and I know. I mean, that it sort of really reinforces that Goody loves him as well. So I'm a huge fan, but. They say the art of coaching is giving players a role in which they can shine and maximize their strength. And, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, depending on which way you want to look at it or he wants to look at it, I reckon his best role is a sub. And it's interesting, George, this is a new thing, the sub, and how it's used. But in basketball, one of the critical things about teams that go the distance in the NBA is the depth of their roster and the players who come on and maybe only play 5-6 minutes, a game. Like, there's a lot of important players in the NBA who get very few minutes, but that are, Patty Mills for years played, very low numbers for the Spurs. So, perhaps there's tactically, I think Goody's using it really well. And perhaps this is a new, it's the first year it's been in. What did we have the sub last year? I don't know. I think, we had the
but it was a medical sub last year. Now it's
so
sub.
I feel like that Goody's using him almost like a tactical weapon. And so, I feel like Smitty's greatest impact is in fact as a sub, and coming on with his power and speed late in the third quarter in the last few weeks has been really, really important. And being able to go back and forward, as you say, Andy, is amazing. Like, And so, to be honest, it might be Smithy's best bet of getting a premiership medal because he's too frosty for me as a defender. And in Melksham, we've got a defensive forward. We've got that role covered. So, there's every chance he wouldn't get a game in the starting 22 regularly if that's what he was shooting for. So, the best way to use him and for him to be involved in the 23 and playing is maybe as a sub. And I reckon Goody's been using him really, really well because he's come on and had an impact, hasn't he? Everyone's noted it.
Mm-hmm.
But over the full journey of a game, some of his footy IQ is going to get exposed over 120 minutes of footy. I really like him as a sub. It's bad luck for him if he wants to play senior footy, but I reckon it's his best chance of being in a premiership side.
Is there a worry of him not getting the footy fitness,
well,
the touch?
They can manage that in all sort of
Well,
ways, can't they?
That doesn't happen these days.
He probably still runs his 15K to get the kilometres up. But in terms
well,
of,
he did. Apparently he did. Like someone on Demonland said that they stayed at the ground because it was raining so heavily. I walked out and got absolutely, like walking to my car, I was drenched about 15 metres outside the G, is that he was running laps after the game in the rain.
That's correct, yeah. And the story about match fitness I don't think is relevant anymore.
Not with high performance.
Not with the high performance stuff.
I'm not talking
They
fitness.
monitor them within an inch of their life, and they have to reach certain standards to be able to play. So whether they play 5 minutes or a whole game, they know whether they're up to playing the game. And so, Smithy doesn't need an extra game or to go to Casey to get touch. It just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
And Jordan in 21 was how much time was he the medical sub? For pretty much 2/3 of the season. So,
and that was a
Chandler.
that was a medical sub as well, where you couldn't just come on in the third quarter. We obviously realised Tomo wasn't needed, and said, well, let's utilise Smith.
And he brought something, didn't he? Like he took a beautiful mark and he exploited their at the time when they were fatiguing, bringing on a player with his acceleration and speed, and suddenly who played a defensive role but can hurt on the offense because he can run away from their tiring defenders. That suddenly becomes a weapon. And again, Goody doesn't get hardly any credit in the media for how tactically savvy he is, and I reckon this is a really interesting way of using a player. I think he's going to be the sub for the rest of the season is my vote.
I totally agree.
He moved really well on the members wing. He actually got a free kick for too high at the end, but he sort of did a nice little sort of blind turn shimmy sort of out of a pack.
And that's confidence, really nice, isn't it? Like that's he's got, Goody's again, another thing I think he's underestimated is his man management skills or his people management skills. And, if he's getting Smithy in the right space and saying, we want you as a weapon, you're not here just because you're a reserve. You're here for a specific role, and this is the role we're going to give you, is to come on and win us a game of footy or do whatever we need you to do. He's an elite level athlete who he comes from a basketball background too, so probably understands that the importance of the bench players. What do they call them in basketball? The bench when the sixth or seventh player, George?
Just the bench, as far as I know.
Like the depth players, like that. But to get through, you need those players. You need to come on and not have your scoring drop off. It's a big stat in America, in NBA, is keeping your scoring differential when your bench players come on.
DZ says the team is really. Do you want something, B-Man?
No.
All right. The team is really DZ says team is really starting to take shape at the right time of year with Clary, Fritsch and Sparrow as best 22 still to come back. Who goes out? I'm thinking Jordan, Woden and Harms as the lucky ones. As the unlucky ones. Very happy with the look of our forward line now, and it looks very exciting with two young contested beasts in JVR and Petty, and Melky, Cozzy, Chandler, Nibbler, and at times Petrarca at their feet. Shout out to Trent Rivers, who is having an outstanding season and a real weapon off half back now with those long, deep kicks. So George followed by Bimban. In terms of best 22, as DZ noted, we're probably missing Clary and Fritsch and Sparrow. Don't think any of us disagree that they're best 22. So who makes way for these three as we head into finals? And I think maybe he's noted the three that could be on the chopping block.
I think he's answered his own question, but perhaps in a different order. I can't see any role for Harms in the long he's He doesn't tag very well. I lost track of the number of times when he was playing in the middle in this game where I said, watch out, here's Taranto's ball coming up, and sure enough it was. He just loses people. He's okay around the ground, but do not put him in the middle. So
he really didn't do himself any favours not kicking those 2 goals because they were straight in front.
Yeah, two dead easy shots for goal. And yeah, if you want to stay in this side and you've got finals looming up in the next couple of weeks, you need to nail those sort of opportunities, and he completely missed them. We've talked about Fritsch Woden before. Don't expect to see Wowie. Not that he's not playing well; it's well enough for what's expected. It's that you get a better quality player in replacement. JJ, unfortunately, has also been a bit of a disappointment. He's had the opportunities in the last couple of weeks, so I think Tommy Sparrow will come back. Tommy's much harder at the ball, and you need that hardness. You can't expect Viney to do it the way he's been doing, surprisingly, every single week. And when you get to finals, you're going to come up against the best midfielders in the competition. So Tommy's been doing a great job inside there, and he's a great kick of the ball as well off that 1 foot that we also know so well about from the 2021 grand final. So, I think JJ might find himself on the outer come the end of the season.
Big man, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think DZ's spot on. I think Jordan Wowie and Harmsy will be the unlucky ones. And, that's when you get a very strong list and you've got players up and fit and, you've got players of the quality of Clary and Fritter coming back in and Sparrow. Well, it's the very definition of a nice problem to have, isn't it?
Doesn't leave much room for young Spargo there for you, big man.
Yeah, well, as I said, it's like it's any, it's like we could all try to predict the grand final team now and see who gets closest, but there's a lot of time to go yet.
Exactly. All right.
Based on our end of year predictions, we do badly at it.
Casey conceded the first 6 goals of the match playing against the howling wind at their fortress at Casey Fields. They clawed back an early 38-point deficit to take the lead at the 24-minute mark of the final term, but the fighting Williamstown Seagulls dug deep to kick a goal against the odds and the wind to win by the narrowest of margins, depriving the reigning premiers of the opportunity of fighting for a top 4 placing before the finals. Andy Moniz Wakefield kicked 3 goals and finished with 17 touches and played a big role in reducing the deficit at halftime to just 5 points. The blustery conditions were troublesome for Casey's tall forwards. None of Brodie Grundy, Ben Brown or Josh Shackey managed to kick a goal for the match. Rookie Matt Jefferson kicked 1 goal. Grundy, for his part, went back to what he's best at by going into the ruck and amassing 31 hitouts, 10 disposals and 6 tackles. Rookie ruckman Will Varell also finished with 31 hitouts and laid 9 tackles in a promising performance. Luke Dunstan was prolific again with 35 possessions and 9 clearances. Michael Hibbard was close behind with 32 touches, and Bailey Laurie made the most of his 20 possessions and laid 10 tackles and kicked a goal. Now, before I get either of your thoughts of the Casey games, if you watched it, I think, George, you only watched half, we have a question from Jabroni that I thought might be best suited here. He asks, if the panel can discuss the merits of selecting Luke Dunstan over Jordan or Harms, or I guess it's the reverse, selecting those two over Dunstan. He's dominated for Casey whilst Harms and Jordan have been underwhelming. He could also be used to ease the load off Viney. I can't really speak for Dunstan as I haven't watched him much at Casey this season. Going by the stats, he's certainly racking them up, but it would appear that he's solely in the team, on the list, I should say, as in case of emergency break class, and the emergency would have to be about a 5-alarm one because there seems to be a lot of players ahead of him in the pecking order. Harms got the gig this week with Sparrow out with a calf injury. Harms had, we know he had two opportunities this week to ingratiate himself back into contention, but missed 2 very easy shots. Despite the 19 possessions on the weekend, he goes back to Casey if Sparrow returns this week. So certainly once Clary returned, it puts a guy like Dunstan even further back, and perhaps Jordan, and then you got Jordan as well. So the pecking order in front of Dunstan is quite long. George, what does Luke Dunstan have to do to get a game? Where do backup mids Jordan, Harms and Dunstan sit in this pecking order?
I think you've nailed the pecking order problem that he's got. There's too many in front of him. It's as simple as that. Unfortunately, Luke, he's a one of those better than VFL players, but not quite good enough for AFL, or is a fringe player, but not in a premiership challenging side like Melbourne is. He's carrying a knee injury as well, which is the other consideration. Carries heavy strapping to his knee area every single week. He knows how to get the ball. He's not all that great with kicking. So I think he'd get exposed really heavily at AFL level. He's the perfect sort of player who really should be looking next year to go to a club like North Melbourne, who'll probably lose. Well, they've lost Zeeble. They'll probably lose Cunnington next year. They're going to need an old head in the middle who can get a lot of possessions and at least stop the ball going in one direction only. But he's too far down the pecking order at this point as far as Melbourne's concerned. So I don't think we'll see him at all this season in the senior side.
Funnily enough, I reckon I agree with all of that. But in some respects, there's one player ahead of him, which is Viney, and because like he couldn't come in for Sparrow because Sparrow plays a different role. Like he gives Viney a chop out, but that when he's not in the middle, he goes to play that high half forward role, and that's where his marking, overhead marking, his kicking becomes so potent. That's why Harms struggles to play that role. So in that sort of inside mid to go out and play the high half forward as well, he's just not as impactful. And I don't think that inside extractor role. 5 years ago, you needed 2 or 3 of those type of players. But now the game is so much about that outside run and running over the ground. You need one. Like Libba and Viney, in my mind, are the two best at it, of getting the ball from a contested situation outside to your outside runners, like now for us, for Rivers or, for Collingwood, for the Dacos. And Dunstan isn't that sort of outside player, obviously. His one role is that extractor role. He can't really play the backup role. That's why Harms was probably ahead of him. But as we talked about last week, I went to that game, to the Casey Coburg game, and I thought he was much, much more impactful than Harms. I was actually quite disappointed with Harms' game. I thought Harms' effort was really good was good in the Coburg game, but he didn't impact the game. Like, when you see, we've talked about it before, the AFL players going back and looking at cut above VFL. Well, Harmsy didn't look a cut above VFL to my eye in that game particularly. And I thought, I would have picked Dunstan. If it was me just on that performance, I thought he was quite impactful. So, but I totally agree, George. I think that he still has has a shot at AFL, but probably not at Melbourne, because a team like North Melbourne, or maybe even I'm thinking of Freo really lack that inside grunt player like a Libba, like a Viney, who can get the ball in contested situations and feed it out. So, but yeah, he's going to struggle to get a game at Melbourne, I think.
All right, let's get into changes. Based on last week's injury list, Clary should still be 1 to 2 weeks away. We've heard reports and seen a little bit of vision of him running well. Could he make a surprise return this week? Who knows? We'll assume no for the moment unless we hear more this week. Other than Clary, late in the week, last week, we got word that Tom Sparrow had withdrawn from the team following Thursday's main session, experiencing some tightness in the calf, pulling up sore. According to GM of Football Performance, Alan Richardson, they do expect him to be back and available for selection for the Kangaroos match. None of the other players on the injury list are close to selection at the moment. So Red and Blue Rising says, "Hi guys, well done on the podcast each week. They are brilliant and insightful. My question for this week is, do we take the opportunity to rest the big three, Max, Track and Viney, considering we could rotate with Grundy, Dunstan, Spargo and still do enough to beat the Kangaroos? These three are so important to our finals chances. I feel it would be wise to keep them fresh and free of any niggling injuries going into September." Roosted Far asks, are we going to give Gawn and Viney a rest? Viney has carried the inside work and surely could do with a spell. Horny for Gawny says, going into next week against North, we would have to rest a couple of players, right? First thought is to give Viney a rest. Sparrow injury hinders this a bit, as well as Max. Rue Beauty says, what a game of footy, had everything. The last 3 weeks of the G have been some of the best days in recent memory. Love the flexibility we have with Petty and Smith being able to impact at either end of the ground. Supporters turning on Tomo again, but for me, he stays in at least another week with Smith to remain the super sub. Grundy will come back in this week, I have no doubt. Max has been amazing the last 3 weeks, solo rucking, but let's not burn him out. Listening to Goody, I think Hibbo will come in too, maybe for McVee, who has had an awesome year, but he's young and may be getting tired. Who comes out? Taj, most likely. This won't happen, but I'd like to see Viney given a rest this week. The bloke has been a wrecking machine the last month and has taken a few big bumps to his shoulders. Give him a week off and bring in Dunstan for a game. Keep up the great work, boys. D. Old Fart says Hibbo has played excellent/consistent footy for Casey since his return from injury and was a regular strong performer for the D's before that. Further, Goody said in his post-match presser that he's been playing outstanding footy and will get his look. Question 1, is Hibbo's potential return likely to be at the expense of Tomo, and if not, who? Question 2, can Hibbo effectively play the third tall defender to free up Jake Lever to play his intercept role? These questions assume that Petty won't be returning to defence anytime soon. Love the pod, guys. Keep up the good work. And Oh My D's finally says, should we bring Grundy in as a sub for the North game and play Gawn for a half? How can we balance respecting our opponent but at the same time resting players as required? So obviously there's a lot of questions here, so I'll break them down and we can go through them one at a time. Last year, we were screaming for guys like Max to be rested for some of the easier games, and I say that in inverted commas, meaning no disrespect to the opposition, just to give players a chop out. So should we take the opportunity to rest Max and play Grundy, or Viney and play Sparrow? And I guess Oh My D's brings up a salient point. How can we balance respecting our opponents but at the same time resting players as required? B-Man?
I reckon that's a really, really interesting question about the respecting opponent. But Bitters but optimistic in the post-game thread of this game just gone made a really, really excellent point, I thought, about the benefit of playing North Melbourne after our run of 3 tough games. So I said last week how confident I was that the Crows would win, and we saw what happened, and what happened to the Pies. The Pies and the Port were absolutely gassed because they played such a fierce, intense game of footy the previous week. Now we've had 3 tough weeks in a row. This one probably wasn't as close, but we worked super hard in it. Our pressure rating was way higher than it was in the Brisbane game. So I don't think it's disrespecting them at all. It depends. Obviously we don't know what's happening with their fitness planning and all of that preparation, but I don't think it's disrespecting the opposition at all. I really hope they do give Max a chop out. The problem with that, he doesn't like getting rested apparently. So, but I could see them bringing Grundy back in, and maybe if they don't rest, take him out of the team, Max doing something like George said, like a 50-50 split, but from the bench. I think McVee will get rested. He looked tired, looked like he was flat. He is coming. All kudos to him. He hasn't missed a game, has he? He's been in the team all season. I think reading the Goody tea leaves is that, he couldn't have given Hibbo much more of a pump up, could he? So I reckon Hibbo will come in. I reckon Tomo will stay in. I think McVee might go out. Viney, probably, would you want to be the coach that tells Viney he's not playing a game of footy? So I can't see him being rested. Maybe. I think that's a good question about respecting the opposition, but I don't, I think in some respects, we talked about this last year, there's bringing an energy into the team of maybe a Dunstan coming in for a Viney, looking at those sorts of things. Certainly Sparrow will come back in. I don't see that as disrespectful at all. And in fact, it might bring an energy to the team that the team might otherwise lack, after 3 big weeks of footy.
George, can you see Hibbo making a return for, say, Tomo, perhaps using that opportunity to rest McVee?
I certainly can. Hibbo's performed very, very well at Casey in the last couple of weeks. He's solid. It was a real pity that he actually wasn't in this game. Because McVee got exposed when Dust
May on McVee.
Yeah, and that was all about muscle.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about height; it's about muscle. And Hibbo would have coped very, very well, I suspect, against Martin. But poor old McVie, you know, he's just not built like that. You know, it's as simple as that. So I think in that respect, having Tomlinson in the side was an error. And people forget that Tomlinson was subbed out. He was the one who had 0 marks for the game, 1 tackle, and 28% disposal efficiency in this game. He did nothing to warrant a position in the side. He got exposed horribly by Rewalt in particular in the first half. He's just too slow off the mark.
He's not great one-on-one, and that fast-paced game exposes defenders to one-on-one contests. So if you're going to play fast, you've got to have good one-on-one defenders.
Yeah. And
Hibbo is great one-on-one.
He's great one-on-one. And the other thing that people say, we've got to have the third tall. You go, yeah, but if the third tall isn't producing that one-on-one contest, then he's not providing what we want.
But the third tall's really only relevant, to be honest, when you're getting the intercept game going. And that's only relevant when you can slow the opposition down so you can force the dump kick and the interceptor comes across and marks it. That's what the third tall creates. It's not just having 3 talls for the sake of 3 individual one-on-one matchups.
Agreed. And I think the other thing, you know, I don't think Tomo fits in well with the side. When he's down at Casey, he gets 30 possessions every week because he plays the Stephen May role. When you put him into the seniors side, he's still trying to play the Stephen May role, and it doesn't work because we've already got a Stephen May. We need him to play the third tall, but he doesn't know how to. So
particularly when he gets dragged away from goal,
he just gets lost. Whereas, you know, when Petty was down, Petty's a natural footballer. He can read the play very well. Yeah. Anyhow, back to the question.
So now we need 2 Petties. Like we're cloning players left, right, and centre. We need 2 tracks, one in the middle, one.
Then.
Yeah. So, I wouldn't be surprised that Hibbo, and especially when Goody mentions in his post-match interview that there's a good chance he's going to be in. You can guarantee.
And McVie looked. I thought just on McVie, it was a really cool moment. Actually, I thought it was caught on the replay. Of course, I didn't see it at the ground, but McVie seemed to be talking to Dusty about something strategically, or I thought that was a nice touch, and Dusty seemed to be happy to be showing him something.
I read that. What was that all about? Well, what Dusty's telling him how he plays, and I'm going to go over there. And
is what I don't know.
Why would
to be, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was about someone over in the crowd. Or
it sounds nice, but why would Dusty be giving him advice on running patterns?
Because he's a nice bloke.
Yeah, I know.
And McVie asked him, I guess. McVie
it doesn't make sense.
Seemed to be the one who initiated the conversation.
Well, what I found interesting about McVie when May went to Martin was that McVie started to play better.
Yeah, he did.
He really had the poise. We started to see the McVie that we know about. So
and had a couple of nice touches, didn't he?
Oh, he was fantastic in that last quarter. So
now's the time to give him a freshen up with a view to bringing back for the Blues game or even for the next week after that.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. So. I'm all in favour. You know, people will forget that we rested Max in this game or something along those lines in a couple of weeks. It'll all be forgotten. Same as it was all forgotten when Geelong did it last year, and they did exactly the same thing. So bringing in a Grundy to give Max more time in whatever form, we don't know. I'd be doing the same with Viney. He's just taking so many hits. Why not bring someone in to give him bring in Dunstan so that Dunstan gets
for his work.
Bring in Dunstan. You can get 30 possessions in the middle of the field, and North Melbourne will think he's fantastic and pick him up in the draft.
Yeah.
So
didn't we? And look, the way Williamstown are probably not a million miles away from where Roos are at. So
yeah.
Didn't we just ship Dunstan off to Fremantle 5 minutes ago?
Either one, yeah. We're trying to pumping his tyres up.
All right, let's get into the preview of the match against the Kangaroos. The Kangaroos started off the season with a bang, winning their first 2 games of the year by a combined total of 6 points with victories over the 2 teams in the West. Since then, they've lost their next 18 matches in a row, culminating in them losing to fellow cellar dweller, the West Coast Eagles, this past week by 5 points in Perth. They travel again this week to their home away from home at Bluntstone Arena in Hobart, where they will face a rampaging Demons outfit who have won won their last 4 games on the trot and will be hungry for a percentage boost to aid in their top 2 aspirations. Supreme Demon asks, what do the Demons need to be cautious of in Alistair Clarkson's comeback game as coach for the Kangaroos down in Tasmania this coming weekend? So big man, take that away, followed by George.
Just before I do, just one comment I wanted to about the game just gone is it was wet for a big chunk of it. And so we played great in the wet. We kicked goals in the wet. It was a few players commented on it. Goody commented on it. So the wet hoodoo's gone now. But just on the question about what do we need to be cautious of Alex Clarkson's comeback game, nothing. Like not a single thing. Like I wouldn't even, it's not even a factor. What I want to see is a ruthless footy team, and it won't matter. Like the question about disrespecting the opposition by resting players, the only danger of that for me is if it sends a signal to the team that, we're not going to be ruthless. Like even if we came in half, rat power, we're going to crush them. Like there's such a gulf in the two teams. One of the things that I watched the Suns-Lions game, and I was talking about this to my friend at the footy on the weekend, seems to me that, the problem for the Lions is they were not switched on right from the get-go, and they were shocked by a team who came out with a clear plan, who went at them hard. Yeah. And I reckon once the team isn't switched on, that's why I always say that first 6 or 7 minutes of a game is so critical, because if a team isn't switched on, it seems to be harder and harder in footy these days to get switched on. Like once you're not switched on. So what I expect and what I hope is a completely ruthless footy team, and that we go in and play as hard as we can. We're near freshness. As I said, we're near our optimal shape, and we look to absolutely smash them. So that would be my only thought about it. And, in terms of Alistair Clarkson, personally, I think it's quite strange they're bringing him back this late in the season. And I have to say, look, I don't know, but somewhat disrespectful to Ratton. Why wouldn't you let Ratton coach out the entire season? I mean, he's basically done that club such a huge, he's dug them out of a hole to be able to come out of, to come in and coach that team. Clarkson hasn't been at training until 2 weeks back. So it can only be a distraction for them, I would have thought, So, yeah, nothing in terms of Clarkson, but everything in terms of our attitude and ruthlessness, because we are now 0.9% behind Brisbane. Percentage is going to be massive. We have got a massive chance. There's possible we could be second after this round. Very possible, because if Geelong beat Port, we win this match, we will be second after this round.
Are we only 1 game behind Port?
Only one game behind Port now. Port play Geelong. If Geelong do us a solid, and I can't believe I'm saying it, Geelong, by the way, are having the mirror image of our 22 season after they had a mirror image of our 21. Sorry, other way around. After they mirrored our premiership year, now they're mirroring our 22. But they've got to do us a solid, because if they win that game, that's the big game. That's the big one for finishing second. They've got to beat them, because they play GWS next week, which will be a tough game for Port. That's at home. But if that won't matter, if the Cats do the business, and like they should, even with their injuries, they've got to beat them. And if they do, we play the following day, and we will end up, if we get make up that 0.9% on Brisbane, we'll finish. There's a very good chance we'll finish the next round in second position. And who would have thought that?
No, the results this week certainly helped us.
Dream results this week. The big result was Suns losing, because that means that the Collingwood Brisbane game is no longer relevant.
George, anything you want to add to the?
No, I totally agree. I don't think we've got anything to fear from Clarkson. In fact, apart from the publicity that North Melbourne got from recruiting Clarkson to the job in the first place, I don't think Clarkson's the sort of coach that North Melbourne need. They actually need someone like a Ratton to hold them through this very dark period while they try to rebuild their list. And I'll still maintain my position on Clarkson, that he was gifted one of the best sides over a series of drafts that caused him to get 4 premierships. It wasn't because Clarkson came into the club. He came into a side that had the likes of Hodge and Franklin and Lewis and Mitchell, and the list goes on before he even got there, sort of thing. So North Melbourne need what Paul Roos did for us. So I'm not worried about that. The other point I'll make is that this is the perfect game actually to bring Grundy in. Grundy's a grunt ruckman, and he's going to come up against a grunt in Goldstein. We don't need to be having Max pummeled all game. Down in Tasmania,
Grindstone, which is a rubbish ground. It's always windy.
Yeah, so there's nothing to fear for us. We can manage players to our heart's content. This is the opportunity to do so, and
the opportunity that Geelong had last year.
Yeah, and they did it. And if we are in the position at the end of this round where we can we finish in second or challenging, which at least for that,
by the way, we'll know.
But it also means that we've still got to keep winning. So you don't want to spend all your tickets putting a Max and a Viney into a meaningless game almost. When we can still win it by giving them a decent managed foray. And there's always the option, like we've seen in the mystery injury of the week will occur at training, and something will happen. So.
Yeah. And just a really, really quick comment about what you're saying, George, is the same with Hardwick going to the Suns, is that, and it really feeds into what I've been banging on about for the last 2 years, is that it doesn't matter how good the coach is. I personally think the coach is overrated. You could make the same argument about Goody. He inherited, 3 All-Australians in track, Maxi and Clary. Of course, they took a bit of time to get going, and he added some pieces. But if you haven't got the high performance management, all of that system's in place, well, you're not going to win a flag, which is why Melbourne went out and got Burgess. We don't win a flag without Burgess. It's as simple as that, and that's why Adelaide went out and got Burgess. And if if the Suns and the Roos aren't able to get that back end stuff, that's what it makes the difference. It's not the coach. I mean, what can a coach do? I mean, like at Lyon. I mean, credit to Lyon and the Saints, they're 5th, unbelievably. Still.
Before we wrap up, we promised last week that we would talk about the AFLW draw that was released the other week. George, you have some insights into that. Do you want to take it away?
Do we want to talk about the draw or the team? We can do a bit of one this week, one next week, if you like.
Whatever you want to do. We can do one this week, one next week. I'll leave it to you.
All right, we'll talk about the team perhaps, given that they announced the leadership group this week. For people who aren't aware, at the end of last season, we re-signed 23 out of the 30 players that we had on the list. So fortunately, we actually didn't lose any players to other sides, which with the advent of all the new teams coming in, we retained all our players. They didn't go elsewhere. We picked up a couple because we lost Daisy Pearce, of course, and we lost Maggie Karras, unfortunately. She was our 2020, I think, first draft pick. She was obviously going to be a future ruck for us. I think she stands at 190, but she's gone back to netball. So we picked up Georgina Fowler from GWS. One of the ones that people may not be aware of is Amy Mackin, who's the sister of Blaheen from Ireland. Amy won the equivalent of the Brownlow Medal in the Gaelic Women's Football Association in 2020. So if she's as tough and as hard as what I've seen on the some of the videos, she'll be a great addition when she transitions to AFL. We got Georgia Gall from the draft, and also she was a cricketer as well in the Big Bash League. We got Charlotte Wilson from Carlton. An interesting one was we promoted Samantha Johnson she was the Casey Demons skipper, but she's just recently had a kid, and so to replace her under the AFLW rules, Sarai Taylor came in from Richmond.
Right.
Sarai.
If she marries a Sarong, it'd be so right Sarong.
Very good. You can pass that on to her if you like.
Dad joke of the week.
Yeah. So she replaces Sam Johnson for this season. And we redrafted Maeve Chaplin after delisting her. the other important thing is, apart from not losing anybody, we actually got a couple back. Eliza McNamara, you might remember, had an accident in the gym early in the season. She was probably one of our 3 or 4 best midfielders. So she's back from injury. Ree Watt, who's another ruck, we got from St Kilda. She was recovering from an ACL injury, I think. She's now back and available to us. And Gabby Colvin, who we lost from the back line, also with an ACL. So we've got 3 first-class players back and available for us this year. So we've actually improved our list, regardless of the improvements that are coming from the players that we've drafted. So, we're in a very good position. They announced the leadership group. Kate Hoare takes over the captainship from Daisy Pearce.
Fantastic.
Tyler Hanks and Libby Birch are in the leadership group, as well as Ree Watt. Now, Ree didn't play a game last year, but she's so valued in the leadership role for the coming season. She's put into the leadership group, so that's a great credit to her. We're in a really good position, I think, to go back to back, quite literally. In this, we've got the right sort of players. I think having Ree Watt in particular is going to create a lot more options for us, because we won't have to use people like Eden Zanker and Taylor Harris in the ruck. Ree's a ruck lady. So it'll give us far more added extras around the ground, simply because those 2 players don't have to go in and try to ruck. And in the absence of Daisy down forward, I think we'll see Taylor a lot more in the forward line, which we will thoroughly enjoy, I'm sure.
No,
So
he gives up boxing, though. Jeez.
Well, yes, that's another story. I wish he would. Given I made a comment in the Demonland threads that with all the AFL directions going towards reducing head injuries, why do you go out and do something like that? It's not.
I used to be a boxing fan many years ago. Not anymore, but I did watch that. That was awful. Like a head got opened up. Like a awful. Not
a good thing. So hopefully she does sticks to football.
The Port ref would have let her play. Just follow. The Port umpire, Port medico would have just let her play the next day.
Yeah. So that's roughly the team. Next team we'll talk about the rounds and things like that. There's a few disappointments in the way this has been set up, but let's talk about those things next week.
First game against the Pies, 1 September.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's end this there. We'll leave it there. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing a big win and, possibly sneaking into second position on the ladder. But let's wait. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to I'm in China, Tom in Thornbury, J. Brad and Jeebs. Thank you to our Facebook commenters, Alistair, Carol, Stephen, David, Ben, Judy and Peter. Thank you to our voicemailers, Flash and Enzo. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Dutch Demons, 3183D, El Diablo 14, Bigfoot, Demon Saw, Track Forever, Buck Naked, Singer, Galordi, Red Jacket, Travi 14, Supreme Demon, Ross Millen, Clint Biscuit, Engorged Onion, Scroll, Horny Fagorni, Monocular, Fat Tony, Pew Pew Pew, Wells 11, Lazy, What Say What, Demonic Final Fantasy, Golly, Jane02, Rhino, DZ, Jabroni, Red and Blue Rising, Roosted Far, Rue Beauty, D Old Fart, and Oh My D's. And thank you to my co-hosts, George and B-Man. And thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and we'll read it out on the next show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Vegas.